You can do it if you think you can. Come on, computer, you can do it. I know it's not you. It's not the poor computer's problem. The poor computer's doing the right thing. The poor computer is doing the right thing. Come on, Twitch. Come on, Twitch, you can do this. You can do this. Yes. Yes, Twitch, you can do it. Come on. First of all, YouTube wouldn't connect with Restream. Come on, Twitch. You can do this for me. Be nice. Come on, Twitch. You've always been the kinder of the two systems. You've always been the one that is gentler, nicer, friendlier. You've been the one, Twitch. You and your purple has always been the one. Hello, John Shea. Hello, people on Twitch. Hello, people on YouTube. Everything now appears to be moderately working. Moderately working. Being the exact emphasis today. Moderately working. Ay, caramba. That's life. Yeah, that's life. Hello, everyone. Now, hopefully, everyone is happy, and everyone's enjoying life, and all the things are working as they're supposed to be. I have got the Restream channels up. I have got everything, the combined chat up. I apparently have the RAF in the chat. I'm not sure whether to be honoured or worried that the crabs are out to get me. But okay, that's good. We have Paul Amos. I'm looking to see who I can see in the chat. I'm looking to see what's coming from the chat. But hopefully. Hello. Not sure why that decided to do that, but hello everyone. Welcome. Welcome. We are live. It is working. And we are here. And I now owe myself a can of Iron Brew for going through that, because I had fun for the IT time for a few minutes. Oh, joyous joys. The chat already needs to be reloaded. For some reason, Restream and YouTube are now having arguments. As if I didn't need more fun in my life, they are having the arguments. Yeah. So, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Yeah, I'm not sure why, but YouTube and Restream are currently having a small war. Just a small conflict. And I have no idea why I have to be stuck in the middle of it, but apparently I am. But hey ho, things could be worse. Hello everyone, how are we all doing? So tonight we're talking about the Battle of Nile from 1798. And I'm hoping, very hoping soon, to have a working chat so I can do my normal of talking to people in the chat. And hello Killerbin! How much was Nelson's leadership as willingness to let someone try things at a heated moment? Is that leadership qualities alone or ability to trust? It's a bit of both. It is a bit of both, honestly. And, okay, that means at least some of the chat's working. If I see some stuff from YouTube in a second, then I'll know it's all working. Hello, Megascrow, Loki's Children, hello, Sean Martin, all those people, Team Locker. I'm currently scrolling. If you see I'm looking completely this way, that's because I have the YouTube studio loaded up in the far, far corner, well over there, and I've got the chat on there as backup. And no, I do not have any idea why there are issues. Hello, Chandler, why they're having the problems they are. I have been told by a friend of mine who is far more experienced in IT stuff than I am, and as I've said before, I used to work as an IT technician. That's how I paid for my way through my bachelor's and my master's, by being an IT technician. But I have a friend who has gone further and works for Google, that the issues I might be suffering could all be coming from the fact that to get my internet to work, I've had to do some, in their words, first grade jankery. Grade 1 jankery. But that's that a grade 1 jankery can only get me for so long. And the trouble is as I said, I need to basically get to the point in my life where I have the money to buy the router that combines the two. And the trouble is, to get everything to work, I need at the levels it needs to be a 2.5 gig router to deal with the internal network. And the 2.5 gig routers are all quite expensive. And the 1 gig router is not going to be able to deal with the internal network. Fun times. Fun times. All fun. All fun. All fun. Anyway, with that being said, today we are talking about the Battle of the Nile in 1798. And it's a good battle. It's going to be nothing more permanent than a temporary solution that worked. Yeah, this is going to be fixed. Because you see, there's another advantage to me getting that new router, is I get to get rid of the BT router. And you will never see a happier man than if I can get rid of that BT router. Poodle still has the ear infection a bit, but it's hopefully going soon. We don't think he's going to need an operation, but he's needed 3 different types of antibiotics and ear wash to get it, because he managed to get the really bad one. Vanguard was Nelson's flagship, yes. People have asked me why the Royal Navy chose Vanguard for the name of the Royal Navy's last armoured fully armoured battle cruiser, last capital ship. And, yeah. That's why. And before we get into it too much, I'd like to point out on the Vanguard issue, just to point to this, the designers called it a fully armoured battle cruiser. They were at the same time had built the King George V's, which they called a fast battleship, and the Lion class they were planning, which they also called a fast battleship. So ergo, if they are building ships they call fast battleships, and they're not calling Vanguard a fast battleship, it's not a fast battleship. Post-war, World War II, some people might want to call it a fast battleship, because that means we rank in equivalent to the Iowas, but that's, again, kind of like the scenario with the Scharnhorst and declaring them battle cruisers so that the Royal Navy could pause capital ship construction. It's politics. It doesn't change what the ship is. It's changing the label for political reasons, not the reality of the ship. Vanguard has been a capital ship name for quite a while. Fisher was a fanboy, but yes. But, yeah. Vanguard was an ironclad class, audacious class ironclad, launched in 1869. Third rate in 1835, usually a third rate, but was a 90-gun 3-decker second rate in 1678. Had been a second rate before that, so yeah, there's a whole debate about the Fisher establishing it as a capital ship name. He certainly claims to, but there's a debate as to whether he actually does or whether he just makes sure it gets used. So, now we're going to have some fun, because this takes place in 1798, but here's the problem, and I have to basically explain both the War of the First Coalition and the War of the Second Coalition, because the Battle of the Nile takes place in August 1798, and those of you sharp-eyed will have already noticed that the War of the First Coalition officially ends in October 1797, And the War of the Second Coalition officially begins in November 1798. So, where does the Battle of the Nile belong? Oh, well, welcome to the joy of being a naval historian, because usually we group it into the War of the Second Coalition in terms of the groupings of the battles. But in practice, it's a continuation of the campaigns and the events which start in the War of the First Coalition. And this is a reality because the actual piece and difference between the War of the First Coalition and the War of the Second Coalition is that basically people are taking a break to get to rapidly gather as many sharp, pointy sticks as they can possibly get hold of, because they ran out of them. They're not actually stopping a war for peace, they're stopping a war to rearm.
Is it working now?
Yes.
Mine was doing anything.
Yours was, it was sinking when I let it must have finished its sink.
Okay. Oh, I don't know.
Fun times, sis. Don't worry, it's sorted now. It is all part of the Second 100 Years' War, because the Royal Navy and the Royal Navy and the French Navy, well, the Marine Nationale in its various forms, like to fight navies, like to fight wars, as does, Britain and France. And honestly, if we're not at war with each other, we're usually at war with the Spanish or the Dutch, or beating up someone else. And there was once actually someone who put forward the argument that the reason why the scramble for Africa was actually a good thing for Europe was not just because of the, all the stuff that they pillaged, but also, more importantly, it distracted them from having a war with each other. Because, the Anglo-French wars would have just continued. Or if you're Austria, making sure Tsar and Russia don't do a funny. Yeah, Austria-Hungary and Russia are constantly having fun. But there again, Austria-Hungary was looking for a new enemy to justify their existence after the Ottoman Empire kind of started to collapse. And stopped looking so... how do I put this politely? So annoying. Anyway, so the War of the First Coalition. How do I describe the War of the First Coalition? Well, imagine someone walks into a bakery and buys a cream bun. And then decides to randomly chuck it at the next person who walks into the bakery. Who then buys another cream bun, but chucks it at the baker who supplied the first person with the cream bun, because they supplied him the first person with the cream bun, which leads that to the baker to then chuck something back at them, but they're aiming for them, but they actually hit the first person who fired, and then all the other people who are in the bakery crowd in and start throwing cream buns at each other. That is the War of the First Coalition. It truly is. The way it starts is probably one of the weirdest wars you can possibly have, because it starts arguably because of the revolution in France. Arguably it's the revolution in France. And it's the fact that all the people who've been kicked out of France are going elsewhere, going, we want you to come help us back in charge, put the nobility back in charge of France. And so the French decide that they should invade the Austrian Netherlands. And please note, the people they're worried about are the Prussians. That's who the emigres are mostly going to talk to. I'll be back in a second. I'm going to close the second door. Just closing this as well. Just having to close this as well. Did you keep everyone entertained, Fluffy Research Assistant? You did, so you deserve a poodle treat, do you? Because you kept it going while I was away. You kept it going. You good boy, didn't you? You kept everyone entertained and talking. That's good. So, that's the War of the First Coalition, and it carries on. It has a few quite interesting and quite big battles. It really does. It has all this interesting sort of content going on and all these interesting fights taking place. And to one extent or another, and I have to admit it's to one extent or another, you find that the powers are not really that happy with their alliances and not really happy with how things are necessarily going. They want to get things better. They want to sort things out, but they can't necessarily do that. And so this is the reality they have to deal with. This is the reality they have to work through. And if you don't mind, I've just found out that the latest update to the Ozbot Center had taken off the anti-flicker. And I've been wondering why the screen was flickering occasionally, and that was it. Basically, everyone just invades the invades the Netherlands. Everyone just goes and invades there. That's the standard thing for anyone. If you're annoyed in Europe, you go and invade the Netherlands, don't you? That's what you do. You'd like to invade the Netherlands, but that's mainly because you've heard there's a shop there which does doggy-friendly donuts. Yes, my poodle has learnt from his sister, who lives in the Netherlands, that there is a shop in the Netherlands which does dog-friendly donuts. And you've been wanting to go there ever since, haven't you? Yeah, if ever we do a naval history trip to the Netherlands, I have to take the poodle with me to go to a doggy-friendly donut store. I don't know. Dogs. Now, realistically, the big things that happen in the War of the First Coalition, as far as the world is concerned in terms of the Anglo-French relations, is that there's things like the Glorious 1st of June, there's the Battle of St. Vincent, all these things, where all sorts of interesting things happen. But on top of that, there is the failed French attempts to invade England, including, of course, appointing one Napoleon Bonaparte, the General of England, the General of the Army of England. And that caused the Royal Navy to have a lot of fun quipping that the British Army had ever been in search of a decent general, and finally they had one. That's not quite correct and not quite right. The British Army wasn't that bad. They really weren't that bad, honestly. They had mostly actually better logisticians than the French did, and that's shown a few times in the Napoleonic Wars. But, yeah, that army didn't really get anywhere. And by the time Napoleon ends up going back to Paris and goes, look, and if we can never get control of the Channel, we are never going to invade, so we are pointless there. And gets sent off to do other things. He does a lot of fighting in Italy, he does a lot of fighting elsewhere, but broadly speaking, he's now thinking the course of how to beat Britain. How to beat Britain. That's the important thing. And he has plans. He has plans. Isn't that great? That's what we like to hear. A general has plans. You agree? A good thing? Yeah, go. Get some sleep. Now, he thinks this through, and he decides the great idea is going to be to use the fact that they failed in these amphibious operations, because, of course, landing in Wales, I've done a video on the Battle of Fishguard, because it's a great video to talk about for the Year of Leadership, because it's just quite so bad. And we all know we're all thankful they didn't actually do the landing where they wanted to do up near Newcastle, because landing on the Tyne would not have been good for them where they are planning to land. They would have been massacred. They decide their plan is going to be to invade India. Okay, this is what Bonaparte's big idea is. Now the thing is, here's the problem. Technically, This all happens in the gap between the war of the First Coalition and the war of the Second Coalition. It's quite terrible, really. But the things keep going on. They keep going on. And the fact is, how do I put this politely? When you actually start looking at the War of the Second Coalition and its origins, it starts back, the origins of many disputes which start off the War of the First Coalition are actually the same ones which start off the War of the Second Coalition. But that's the way history goes. The more interesting thing that happens in the War of Second Coalition actually takes place in it, unlike the Battle of the Nile, which is grouped into it, but realistically takes place between the wars, while Britain and France are at war, but yeah, we'll just get rid of it interesting, is that in a Battle of the Malta Convoy, on February 1800, in one of Nelson's least well-known battles, he kills off Jean-Baptiste Pierre. And Pierre is probably the closest thing France has to a Collingwood. And that's a problem, because if he hadn't been killed then, he probably would have been in charge, not Villeneuve. And he's far better at leading an Allied force than Villeneuve is. Far better. So yeah. That is going to be a consequence. And that is a direct consequence of this campaign, because there is the Malta convoy. They are trying to get supplies to Malta to reinforce their position at Malta, which they get to take in this campaign. Good old Bonaparte. So many plans. Unfortunately, he never seems to understand that the sea, unlike land, you cannot claim. You have to patrol, you can get control of it, but you cannot claim it. You cannot declare it is yours and say it is sacrosanct, that it should forever may remain yours, because you can only maintain that control as long as you have a ship upon its surface. Anything fixed shall be moved by man or by the sea, either of which will have a chance. And by the way, I would like to point out, one of the worst things we're going to be talking about in this battle, in terms of from a description, and that causes me the most annoyance, is the amount of times people go, but was it a Trafalgar battle? No, it's better than Trafalgar. Okay? We are talking today about the Battle of the Nile. In the Battle of the Nile, the French come in with 13 ships of the line and 4 frigates. 9 ships of the line are captured. 1 ship of the line is destroyed. 1 ship of the line is scuttled. 1 frigate is sunk and 1 is scuttled. In simple terms, force of 13 ships of the line and 4 frigates, they leave with 2 ships of the line and 2 frigates. And the British don't lose a single ship. The French have up to 5,000 killed and wounded, and another 4,000 captured. The British lose 218 killed and 677 wounded. That is a disparity in odds of result, which has never yet again been equalled. The closest percentage-wise naval battle you will get to it is a battle called Midway. So please note, if you're talking about Trafalgar, Trafalgar is a great strategic victory. It is. But in terms of a great strategic annihilation, Trafalgar is this level. It is as high as many can ever hope to achieve. The Nile is higher. The Nile is one of the, when you look into it, one of the scariest battles that ever took place. If you're considering for the French force and their survivability, your odds of getting killed or captured are so high, it's obscene. It is obscene. And this is, remember again, this is in an age of warfare before the mechanization of machine guns and weapons that we consider mass killing systems. No, this is a battle still with old school artillery. No shells. No shells. So that being said, let's talk about how we end up with the Mediterranean campaign. What do we have going on? Well, if, as Examara has just put it in the chat, and has put it so well, all wars are about trade and access. They were about trade and access then, they're about trade and access today. If you were talking to someone today about, I don't know, the war in Ukraine, from the Russian strategic perspective, there are all sorts of honourable reasons I'm sure they're claiming, but realistically, it's access to the sea and security of access to the sea for trade, for their economy, to provide them with defensive depth for that sea and that trade. Those are all things which they're looking for. That's it. If you want to talk about Taiwan from a Chinese perspective, if you control Taiwan, you have control of the Taiwanese Straits, but also you have access into the wider Pacific. If you don't control Taiwan, then there is a potential problem in your way with access to the Pacific, because Taiwan is such a powerfully located position. That is the reality. If we're talking about the French and their desire to take Britain out of the war in this period, their War of the First Coalition plan to invade Britain, as Leslie's pointed out, if they do go into the, what do you call it, into the north, if they do go into the Tyne region, they get stuck between the Geordies and the Mackems. In which case, I think for that scenario, the Geordies and Mackems might actually put their traditional problems with each other aside and go, "Ooh, we get to have fun beating up them for a change! Variety!" That is not a position I want to be in as a French. But why are they interested in it? Why are they going for the Tyne? Why are they going for Wales? Why are they doing all this? To draw forces out so they can attack and take out Britain. Why do they want to take out Britain? Because of where Britain's located. Britain has a natural advantage. Its mere existence blocks your access to the sea quite easily and makes it, and the way the currents flow and the winds go in the channel gives it an advantage. And it makes use of that. And you have two choices. You either invest in infrastructure up to a level at which you take it on in equal terms, or you take it out using the advantage you have, which is your army. That is their reality. That is their situation. That is what they're looking at. So that being said, sorry. There you go. Let's consider the Battle of the Mediterranean. Now, Bonaparte is now facing a mind who is equal to his own. This is the point. Bonaparte's advantage is he can usually see the long game far better than most of the opponents he fights in Europe. And he can usually have a long objective and plan out a long strategy, whereas the others are reacting to him. This is one of the problems when he comes across a certain Russian general when he's doing his invasion of Moscow. Because the Russian general does play the long game. And the Russian general knows exactly how to play the battle and plays it perfectly to a T. Knows how to deploy General Winter to his advantage. But the biggest threat he's ever fought was against St. Vincent. St. Vincent was blockading Toulon. And St. Vincent's job was to keep, as head of the Mediterranean fleet, was to keep the French in Toulon. Simple, really. It's always simple. Keep the enemy in Toulon. But what do you do, therefore, when you know the person in there is planning to break out? Do you let him go? Here's an interesting question for you all. Just a little one. I'm just going to put this in... I'm going to put a poll in... there. And I'm going to put another poll into mod view. Hello. Add in a this is what I'm going to add in a let me just do this. Adding a poll into Twitch. Yep, got it. Now, poll has started on Twitch. So let me put forward to you the dilemma of St. Vincent. St. Vincent is charged with patrolling Toulon. He knows that a guy called Bonaparte is one of their more successful generals, wants to break out. Now, Bonaparte is going to take a big army with him. What's he going to do with it? And more importantly, if he takes this army, where's it going to go? It's going to probably go a long way from France if they're going by ship. Is it going to Britain? Well, as the Mediterranean fleet, there's the blockading there's also the squadron at Gibraltar. Then there is the Western Squadron blockading northern France. The Channel Squadron blockading northern France. The Western Squadron is mostly blockading northern and western France. The Channel Squadron is mostly blockading, and Channel Fleet's mostly blockading northern France. And there's the other fleets in home waters. Maybe they're going to the Caribbean. Maybe they're going to the Caribbean. That is a possibility. That's an option. You know, if they are going to there, that's useful. But, and this is the big, glorious glutinous max of this, maybe they are not. Maybe they're going elsewhere. Maybe they're going somewhere where they'll be far away from causing trouble for home. And also, there's the fact that if you try too hard to block them from going out, you could find yourself dealing with a larger fleet, because there is quite a large fleet in Toulon. But if you allow them to break out and go off, then you have a smaller fleet in Toulon. And also, someone like Bonaparte is going to take the best, most ready ships with him. And if he does that, you're creaming off the top of the fleet in Toulon. So what's your real choice here? What do you do? Now, to that, you also have to add in that St. Vincent has some aces in his sleeves. As cantankerous as he is, and by God is he cantankerous when he wants to be, he has some aces in his sleeves. Those aces include things like he has Nelson as one of his senior rear admirals. Useful. He can detach him with a force to follow them. He also theoretically has the Kingdom of Naples with their frigates at his disposal, although he places about as much faith in them as he would place in the water retention of a wet paper bag with holes in it. But still, he has them. He also has the knowledge that should the French go anywhere else in the Mediterranean, they will need logistical support from Toulon, and he's blockading that. And if he closes everything up, then he's going to control it. And if he controls it, they can't get the resupply. They can't get it. The full name of St. Vincent is John Jervis, Earl St. Vincent. And I have done a video about him already this year. Now, the British aren't quite so sure where the French are going, because the French are talking all sorts of different ideas. They're talking all sorts of options. Ultimately, on the 9th of May, Bonaparte gets out. And he goes along the coast, heads to Genoa, picks up more reinforcements at Genoa, and heads along. And St. Vincent tucks in behind him. Now, St. Vincent then sends Nelson after him. First of all with just a small number of ships, but later on reinforces him with more ships. Why does St. Vincent do this? And this is why I'm telling you all this, why the whole is still going. So you go to yes or no. I think St. Vincent's idea was this. If you could take the army of Italy, the army that has won so many victories for France at this point, and if you can take all the troops they have from the First Coalition, the troops he's built up loyal to him in England, and you can take their general, and you take them out of France, then France is sufficiently unstable, it will collapse under its own weight. And if revolutionary France collapses, well then, they've won, haven't they? The English win. And that's realistically the point he's got going here. This force is problematic, surely, and they could achieve great things for France if they are used correctly. But that requires an officer who understands naval power. And Bonaparte has shown immediately he doesn't understand naval power, because he's forgotten. Why couldn't he invade England? Because he didn't have the naval forces necessary to get superiority to sea. And now he's launching an amphibious operation without control of the sea. He is launching an amphibious operation without having control of the sea to support him. Think about that. How smart is this? How smart would someone like St. Vincent consider this? If your logistical strength and everything is on land, you're going to go by sea. You weren't able to launch an invasion of England, of Britain, over the Channel, which is a far shorter distance than anywhere you're planning to do with the number of ships you're gathering. Because you lack the naval strength. Now, yes, if he'd broken out and headed towards Gibraltar and headed east, that could have been a problem. But that's where St. Vincent was. St. Vincent was covering east. If Bonaparte goes east, he runs into St. Vincent's fleet. But if he runs west, well, he's gone off into the far Mediterranean. And his army is going to be stuck there. And that is actually what happens. And that happens largely because of the Battle of the Nile. Because of who St. Vincent sends rabidly chasing him. Now, yes, there is a whole intelligence fund, they're getting there. And through May, June and July, there is a constant delayed intelligence and both sides getting false information and all sorts of things going on. And good old Bonaparte picks up supply ships from everywhere he can get them. He really does keep going different places to get supply ships. That's what his aim is. He's always trying to grab different supplies. Always trying to grab the things that he can which are available. And it's sensible to do so. It really is. But it's also, how do I put this? Not really good for Bonaparte doing that. Because you see, what happens is he captures Malta very quickly. He turns up, he demands the Knights of St. John let him bring his whole fleet in. Knights of John go, no, you can only bring 2 ships at a time in. That's not good enough. He starts a war. The French members of the Knights Hospitaller refuse to fight him, and they basically end up with a scenario where they are hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned and overwhelmed. And Malta falls. They end up negotiating for 3 million francs, and in return, Bonaparte gets everything. Bonaparte gets everything. It's not particularly successful for him long term, though. Because by taking Malta, guess what happens? He sends a ship off, a frigate, with the news and loaded with treasure to go to Toulon and tell them what's happening and tell them they have taken Malta. And anyone want to guess what happens to this French frigate? Anyone want to guess what happens to this frigate? Loaded with gold, loaded with booty, going from Malta to Toulon. Anyone want to guess what happens to this French frigate? Lions, you've got it. The Royal Navy capture it. And they get the news. And they go, woohoo! And by the way, does anyone think the Royal Navy returns the captured Knights of St. John gold to the Knights of St. John? Anyone? Anyone want to guess where that gold goes back? Not a single bit. Oh. And yes, Mark Harkness, a new flag does appear on the mast. The ship does get taken over by the Royal Navy. And oh, please note, there's a small problem coming later. When I get onto the subject of the French ships, I can't find paintings of them in their French colours. I can only find drawings of them when they've been captured by the British. That caused me actual problems hunting for pictures in this video. Oh. You know, I can't is to defend against the porn bots, so I'm sorry, but yeah, that's life. So it's the Mediterranean campaign. He does well, he captures Malta, but as said earlier on, I mentioned earlier on, there is the Battle of the Malta Convoy, which later on is where Jean-Baptiste Pierre dies, and he's a real loss because you have Villeneuve still alive, but you've lost Pierre, and Pierre is far better than Villeneuve will ever be. Anyway, and they do the offloading in Alexandria. They do the offloading in Alexandria. But guess what? Alexandria Harbour at this point is tiny. It's a baby pot. It's a babby of a port. And he has picked up so many merchant ships Bonaparte has in his travels. He has taken on so many supply ships, so many store ships, that the fleet can't stay there with him. That the fleet can't join him in Alexandria. But he's conquered Malta, and now the fleet need to find a temporary place to go. Okay? This is where things get really, really, really bad. And I'm honestly saying this is really, really bad, because they have a whole discussion about this. There is a whole discussion about this. And most of the discussion that they come down about their joint selection comes back between what this man believes Bonaparte wants him to do, and this man, what he thinks he'll do. It's not a good discussion. It is so not a good discussion. I'm really wondering why the screen keeps flashing on me. What's happening? I hope it's not flashing on all of you as well. Camera's sorted. OBS should be okay. It's all up to date. It's all updated itself. That could be the problem. It could be an update, but yeah. It's your own. It's only at my end, Doc. It's not flashing for. Is it not flashing for any of you on the screen? I'm guessing it's at my end, but yeah. It's a worrying period. Anyway, so you have Vice Admiral Francois Paul Brez d'Angles. And he's strange. He is very strange when it comes to his planning and his thinking. What do I mean is strange about him? What is strange detail? He is... Okay. He's a noble who survived in revolutionary France. And the reason he's probably survived is no one considers him a threat. Because as much as he is a technocrat, and as much as he is an administrator, and he's been fairly good at supporting Bonaparte in his operations, arranging supplies, etc., he's not what anyone would call a competent leader of men in combat. I'm glad the flashing isn't going through for anyone, it's just at my end. Okay, it's probably not the graphics card, I'll figure it out. I'm not sure why there's flashing going on that screen. It's just that screen as well, not that screen, so that's why I thought it was just the camera. But we'll see, we'll see. He is... How do I describe him? He is the kind of officer who you would want to put in charge of an operation of very minor and very delicate requirements, where you will have someone who will follow orders to the letter and go no further, do nothing else. He's brilliant as that kind of officer. And that is a problem. Because as far as he's concerned, Bonaparte is God and he will follow him. And do exactly what he tells him to. And this is an issue. Because Bonaparte, as we've been over, as competent a general as he is absolutely terrible at naval power. Really doesn't understand it. He's frustrated by it so often, one would think he would actually go and apply some study to it. But no, he just presumes what he has to do is actually throw more army at it. He presumes he has to throw more army at it. That is his policy. That is what he does. He throws more army at it. And it doesn't really work like that. History doesn't work like that. Naval warfare doesn't work like that. Now, his point, how do you throw more army at a naval problem? Lyon's example is you apply more army methodology. Okay? So, alright, then we must have a sincere plan of action and you must follow, to example, to the letter. You must be at this place on this date, you must do this by this, and this by this, and this by this. And of course, in a land campaign, you can do that because you can look at the roads, you can look at the weather, and you can accurately chart how far you can march a day in advance. With the sea, how's the wind blowing? How are the currents? When are you going to be able to break out of your blockade? And it gets worse as he gets older, honestly, Bonaparte on naval things. One of the other things is he's an artilleryman. And his simple answer to the artillery fight is, to the ships losing the battles, is that they need more guns. This is one of the reasons why the Tonnant class is an 80-gun third-rate ship of the line. Michael Cooch, I'm going to be doing a video about the generals at sea at some point this year, and whilst they're called generals at sea, that's literally because that's how they think at the time. And Monk is many things, but not a general at sea. Very nearly was doing his battle this month, but I decided to do it at a different point, a different Monk battle later in the year. Now, the thing is, in contrast to Nelson's pet, I have no idea what to describe him. I wouldn't want to call him a naval officer or a naval commander, but he was fairly good as a naval captain. I just don't think should have been a vice admiral by this point, by any stretch of the imagination. You have Rear Admiral Horatio Nelson. Now, whilst people's accounts and views of him might vary, depending on who you're talking to, onto how capable and how good he was versus how good he was at self-promotion, one cannot argue that he was not an absolute rabid dog of war. He was. He was, without a doubt, a naval officer through and through, who understood the value of sea power, who understood the value of naval power, and knew that its application was more than just individual ships and individual men. It was about harnessing the combination of both. He also knew that in battle, the first thing you were going to lose, especially in any type of action which was going to be close, would be command and control. Especially if you don't have enough frigates to act as your transmitters of signals. And in this operation, he has Well, one ship with him that can act as a repeater? I know, this is an Alex treat. You don't like it, you think you deserve a poodle treat. You don't notice, but there is literally a paw sitting on my arm going, poodle treat time, because you're getting a papa treat. Now, the thing is, Nelson is also, despite being, let's see, he was promoted, he was 39, he wasn't yet 39 years old when he was made Rear Admiral in 97. In 98, he is not yet 40. He's 39 years old. 39 years old. Before people start going, yes, well, he was promoted, due to the seniority thing. No, he wasn't. It's one of the things I find amazing. Okay, yes, he's got... Seniority is not the only thing which guarantees you promotion to Admiral. The Sea Lords have all sorts of options for how to pick who becomes an Admiral. They can argue you don't have enough sea time, so you can't become an Admiral. They can literally argue that. They can force that. So captains might have been a captain for longer, but if they haven't got the sea time, they're not becoming an Admiral. 2, they can always promote, if they want to, they can promote you to an Admiral the Yellow. 3, they can send you off to a foreign navy to go and serve with them while promoting others. They have lots of options. And also, they can give officers more sea time. They can give them successes. They can give them chances to earn glory. And Nelson had had ample opportunities, and he'd repaid them by giving them glory back. So, yeah, when someone turns around to me and goes, he was just promoted to Rear Admiral at that point because of seniority, I look at them and go, no. Sorry, no. It's not that simple. That is... If you're looking at it, if you were talking about a navy which was purely operating in peacetime, with no other outside influences and no other scenarios, you would be completely right. We're talking about a period where the fleets are almost constantly at war. So, no. It's a lot more fun than just that. And Nelson has been picked. St. Vincent is happy to have him. He knows if he deploys him, he will attack the French, and he will either win the battle or die trying. Nelson is a great commander. He takes calculated risks. Very happy to take the calculated risks. Hello, Anna. And everyone else. I think Estrella will turn up earlier as well. Yes, hello, Estrella. And Raptorat, and Tanith, and Seneca. And Lions, of course. Hello. Hello, everyone. Now, the thing is, this is advantageous. This is useful. Having someone who takes constant calculated risks is great, but also because he takes calculated risks, his style of leadership is very different to D'Angela's. Angela's is very much, we've got to have a conference and you've got to do exactly what I say because we're going to plan this out, and everything. I want to have consensus, but I want everyone to basically agree with the orders I've been given, and that's what I'll push through, and I'll follow my orders. Whereas Nelson is more a case of, these are my objectives. These are what we want to do. Communication's probably going to break down in this fight. So here's what I want to achieve. Here's my overall aims. Let's go do this. Now, believe it or not, there's a huge debate in the French fleet about where they should be waiting for Nelson. Where they should be waiting for him. Because they can't go into Alexandria Harbour. They can't. They cannot go into Alexandria Harbour. It's not big enough. And so they have a discussion. And Contra-Admiral Armand Blanquet, who is probably the best naval officer in the senior ranks in this fleet, is going, we should be in open water. Why? Because open water gives them a chance to maneuver. It means the ships are already manoeuvring, and means if they get caught by the British and they can't win the fight, they have a chance of getting away. No, no. This is in direct contrast to the Russo-Swedish wars we were discussing not that long ago. Good old D'Anglais doesn't wish to lose contact with Bonaparte. So he goes to Aboukir Bay. This is Aboukir Bay. Does anyone think this bay looks remotely defensible in any way, shape or form? Does anyone here think that anchoring in this bay in a long line is a remotely sensible and defensible idea at all? Because if I was looking for a bay to anchor in for safety, I'd be looking for something with a small entrance. Something that I can command from my ships. That is not a small entrance. That is, by definition, a bay, but it's not exactly a defensible space, is it? It's not. Now, in defense of Bonaparte, who seems to have been the guiding force of this, Bonaparte did actually send a message and send instructions for them to go to Corfu so that they could support him in his next pursuit against the Ottoman Empire. Unfortunately, that got intercepted by partisans, and so it never reached there. And of course, well, this gentleman, Bruce, and I'm going to call him Bruce because that's normally what people refer to him as, without instructions, he ain't doing anything. Without instructions, he ain't doing anything. And no, there are no shoals. There is nothing there that's going to assist you in your defense. Nothing. Well, there is a sort of shoal, but that's, again, it's not going to assist in any way, shape, or form. There is nothing there. That is a massive, wide open bay. It would be easier to flee the fleet, I would agree, Carmen Gasberg. But the thing is, he anchors them in order of battle and in line. So he positions himself as if he's going to fight a battle. He positions himself in many ways as if he's expecting the Royal Navy to do what the Swedish do to the Russians. Remember I talked about the battle where the Swedish just kept going round in front of the Russians while the Russians were just anchored there blasting away at them going, okay, you take a battery from us each in turn. Michael Cooch just got, in that case, stay the frigate away from that bay. Yeah, that is what you should have done. That is what you should have done. And that would have been the sensible thing. But they don't. So this is where we're talking about today. We're talking about the Battle of the Nile, which actually takes place in Aboukir Bay. Aboukir Bay. And it's a gorgeous place to go and walk. I do admit this is one of the interesting things. The amount of people who go to Egypt and never go to visit Aboukir Bay. And the amount of friends I've had who go there and went, oh, I forgot that's where the naval battle takes place. I didn't go to see it. And I go, there's a lot of history still there. I know there's the pyramids, and I know they're very cute. I do realise the pyramids are chronically attractive to everyone to go and take your photos with them. But Aboukir Bay is a glorious piece of beachfront, and it's beautiful to go and see. Yeah. It's a glorious beach to go to. But anyway, we've reached the shameless book plug part, and this is where I say thank you to everyone for liking, sharing, subscribing, supporting the channel, everything you do. This is where I say thank you, and do you want to remind them about your picture that they can now buy? Do you want to? I should point out... Oh, you just want to be you just want to have your belly rubbed. Okay. I should point out that for the pictures down there, the senior flight research assistants, which is now which I've been allowed to do, any half the proceeds of any of those items which sell go towards buying biscuits for the poodle. Now, to be fair, and squeaky toys. To be fair, he's doing his best to claim, his absolute best to claim that he is a poor, maligned creature who is starved and dependent upon your supplies of biscuits. But you all know the truth that I will buy them anyway. But yes, we have agreed that it's only fair compensation for the poodle that half of all of them go to him. So yeah, that's his happiness. And thank you to all the people who have bought them. As I said, if it sells 100, if there are 100 sales of it over this month, then I'm allowed to start doing more with the dogs. Yeah, more of the fluffy research assistants in the pictures. If not, I don't know what'll happen. We'll see. We'll see what I can negotiate. But thank you to everyone who's already bought them. Get them stickers. Yeah. Do you want to realise something? Okay. Just before we get back into this, just quickly. I bought this box just before Christmas. All that's left are 2 bags. That's all that's left. I have to buy you another box of these. There are 10 kilograms of biscuits in here. Do you know what's worse? Your vet keeps telling me that you're underweight. He's all fine. He's eating everything. He just, yeah. Okay, yes, I did just show the entire box of biscuits, so yes, I do suppose that does deserve you another biscuit, but don't tell your mother, because I am going to get into trouble for being too generous. There you go. How long do those boxes normally last? Normally they last about 8 months. They can last up to a year, but they normally last about 8 months. Fast metabolism, yes. But yeah, he's the one who the corgi can't have those biscuits. He gets another box of biscuits. But yeah, this one, the ear infection has made him very, very hungry. And also the fact, you know, I will say this down here, he's been getting more. He's been getting longer walks down here than he did back in Epsom. I'm always sure my mum is watching. Anyway, leaving that to one side, let's talk about the Royal Navy fleet in this force. And it's worthwhile considering the Royal Navy force because it's interesting. This was HMS Vanguard. And if you look at this battle fleet, you'll notice something. There is not a single first rate here. Not a single one. This is the other difference. You know, I was talking about it when I did the video about the Rostolov. You know, in some of the battles between the Russians and the Swedes, the Russians would turn up with 7 first rates in the battle. That's the same amount of first rates as there are at the Battle of Trafalgar. When you're dealing with fleets of the size of the Royal Navy and the French Navy, you're going to have, most of your fleets are going to be made up of third rates because of number of ships you're building. That is, to an extent, what the Swedish find themselves in the problem of, because they build their fleet to deal with what they think are likely to be their threats, the French and the British. And, you know, they're the likely larger navies they might have to build, and you know, this is similar for the Danish. But the Russians just go, oh, we'll just build first rates. We'll just build these big, massive ships. And they won't be useful anywhere else pretty much in the world, but we'll use them in the Baltic, and they'll be horrendous in the Baltic. But this is the fleet. This is the fleet you're normally facing the Royal Navy, and that did cause an interesting comment. I have to admit, from someone who went, "Oh, does this mean the Russian fleet could beat the Royal Navy?" No, because the Royal Navy would turn up with 4-to-1 numbers on the Russian fleet, and they would just go, "So you have 4 third rates to deal with per first rate. Good luck. Bye bye." And then go home with a collection of first rates as prizes. Because that's how the Royal Navy works in this time period. You turn up with 20 ships, they turn up with 20, with 20, they've got another 20 more behind it, another 20 more behind that, another 20 more behind that. Because they have to work like that. Now, if we start looking at the names in this force, you start to realise that it's a fairly capable force. Really is a fairly capable force. Hello. Are you trying to get up in my lap or something? What are you up to, Poodle? What are you up to? You have HMS Goliath and HMS Zealous at the front under Foley and Hood, and that's good choices. Foley and Hood, both capable officers. Orion under Captain Sir James Samaras. Remember, I've done a video about Samaras and his leadership in various battles. He's another good officer. Captain Davidage Gould, an audacious, a capable officer. Captain Ralph Willett Miller, in charge of Theseus. Vanguard. Rear Admiral Sir Horatio Nelson, and then Captain Edmund Berry. You'll notice that there's only one admiral in this entire force. Do you know who's the senior captain, a senior officer after Nelson in this force? Captain Thomas Trowbridge. And he brought the ships out to him. When St. Vincent needed to send ships to reinforce Nelson, he doesn't send another admiral, he sends Trowbridge out to reinforce him. All 74s. There's not a single 64 there. There's only one sloop of war, the HMS Mutiny. There is HMS Leander, doing it for the 4 freights. A good frigate. There's HMS Alexander under Captain Alexander Bell. A good ship. A very good ship, you know. And Alexander Ball is a good captain. Bellerophon under Captain Henry Darby. Another capable ship. All these ships are capable, and all these officers are fairly capable and experienced officers. That's the advantage Nelson has in this fight. He's going in with a force which is mostly made up of captains who are experienced and know what they're doing. And he's going with a force of 74s. They're third rates. Now, the thing is, again, there is often the argument put forward by people to me, and they look at the battle now and they go, well, you know, the British have an advantage. They have 14 ships of the line. The French have 13. That's an extra ship of the line advantage. And that would be true if they were all exactly the same. That would be true, wouldn't it, if they were all exactly the same? You weren't about to start licking your papa's chair, were you? Because you're not supposed to do that. Poodles. Poodles. That's not good for either side, considering where some of these names end up, Lions. That's not good for either side. Then we have the French fleet. And the French fleet is ever so slightly different once you start looking at their names and their details. You realise very quickly that they have not just a vice admiral, they have with them 3 contra-admirals. Not sure why that's been changed to counter-admirals, but by Microsoft. Actually 4, isn't it? One, two, three, four. 4 contra admirals. So 4 rear admirals, 1 vice admiral, and a commodore. Okay. Then you start to realise that their ships include L'Orient, which is a first rate of 120 guns, and several of their third rates are 80 gunners, the Tonnant class, including Tonnant herself. Now the thing is, once we start considering this force, they are fairly equal. I think you can agree the forces are looking at are fairly equal. The thing you can disagree on is, wow, that's a lot of senior brass. That is a lot of senior officers. And why are there 2 flag officers on 1 ship? Because how do I put this politely? Because basically one is acting as the other's chief of staff, but also to an extent as the political insurance on them. In terms of a constellation of stars and what you have going on here... Sorry, just checking on the poodle. What are you doing? Down you come. Go to sleep. In terms of the scenario you're dealing with, this is a force which is very heavy on the senior officers. Very, very heavy on the senior officers. I mean, I think at this battle, if we were just counting them in modern stars, you'd find there's 12 stars here. Whereas the Royal Navy has 2 stars. But also, once you start looking at these officers and their experience, that your biscuits are down there. Once you start looking at these ships, you sort of go again, okay, these are all... Some of these ships are very new ships. Some of these ships have barely had a shakedown cruise. Some of these ships are barely trained. So they've had to get putting a lot of seniority with them. They've got a lot of doubling up to try and get these ships to perform to their best. But the problem is, that seniority doesn't necessarily have the experience, because again, this is a post-revolutionary France Navy. And as I've talked before again, first of all, you have the reforms of the French Navy, which get rid of all the Protestants, all the Huguenots. All of them are taken out of the Navy. And that causes trouble because the Huguenots had built up a huge section of the Navy. So they lost that level of institutional knowledge and experience. All those officers at all the different levels gone off to other navies. And then you have the revolution. And that gets rid of even more. Whilst people like Buis had survived, let's be honest, anyone with any talent or skill who they're actually worried about being a threat to the revolution had either been got rid of or had got rid of themselves by getting out of there. That is a problem. That is a real problem to deal with. And the thing is, that hadn't just affected admirals, that affected captains, commanders, officers at almost every rank. And so now you have a fleet which is built up of ships which are new and big, and a weakness in your officer pool. You have a real weakness. And the ships they're building, well, when you look them up, they do have illustrious careers. Most of their illustrious careers include them having HMS in front of them, in front of their name. That is a result of this battle. And here's the really strange thing. In nice way, for manoeuvring at sea in a naval battle, they actually have an advantage. They have 4 frigates. They could be using 3 as repeaters and have 1 chase off the British sloop of war and stop the British having any ability to communicate with each other at all. If they're prepared to do it that way, they theoretically have that capability. And a later HMS Malta is in there. I dare you, if you go to the okay, the easiest way to do this, go to the Wikipedia, click on the battle now, click on the order of battle, and then click on any of the French names. Pretty much any of the French ships. And the page it'll take you to, they'll refer it to as a Royal Navy name, because it spends longer as a Royal Navy ship than it does as a French ship. It's almost embarrassing for the British. But this is a viable option. Now, the thing is, I will say this to Bruce. He had been offered multiple times, and then, of course, orders were lost that would have directed him to it were lost, the option to go to Corfu. But he stayed because he felt the French army needed his assistance. I honestly think it would have been sensible to have gone to Corfu. Corfu has safer anchorages, and it's a lovely space in the Ionian Sea. There is an interesting thing, though, when you consider if the French fleet had gone to Corfu, how exactly were the French Navy supposed to communicate with them properly and get support properly from them? Because that's literally the opposite side of the Mediterranean. No one would think of Corfu as a natural place for you to be putting your fleet if you are supporting operations of an army operating out of Egypt. No one would think it. Cyprus mainly, maybe, not Corfu. Look, we'll deal with any SDSR questions after at the end of the video, or on Brew Ships on Sunday. Yeah, there's all sorts of fun things coming out, especially if the 5% plan happens. Why is there an why is an Ocean class ship of the line in this fleet? Well, in the nicest way, Knight, you're thinking purely about the status of the fleet, not about the status of the. You're thinking about the status of the admiral, the status of not the status of the fleet. The Orion is dispatched to this fleet literally because what else would Napoleon travel on to go on his great expedition? What else would Napoleon want? He's got to have a first rate. Now, this turns out to not be a good thing for them. It really isn't a good thing for them. Now, Nelson first turns up at Alexandria and goes, hang on, I can see all the transports, but where are the warships? Luckily enough, HMS Zealous and other vessels go wandering, and this is the other advantage of having the third rates he has. He can have them go a bit wandering. And Zealous spots the French anchored in Aboukir Bay. And again, if you look up Aboukir Bay, it is not far. It is really not far from Alexandria. In fact, it is literally just up the coast. It's a perfectly nice spot, but it's not somewhere I would pick to park my fleet. in this scenario. And again, if you're visiting Alexandria, if you're going down the Nile Delta, you can quite easily get to Aboukir Bay. Go have a look at it. It's a beautiful spot. It's just not where I'd park a fleet. Hi, Daisy. Now, the thing is, Zella spots them, and then Goliath spots them. There is a dispute as to whether there's 16 ships a line or 13. But honestly, between the two signals, honestly, Nilsson doesn't really care, because they're anchored there. At roughly the same time as they're spotted, and this is on the 1st of August, they spot them. 1400 hours. The French lookouts on the Herux, which was a Centaur class 74, sight the Royal Navy. Sight them 9 miles off the mouth of Aboukir Bay. Initially, they think there are only 11 Royal Navy ships. That's probably because my namesake and HMS Swiftsure were still doing their scouting operations at Alexandria and were so to the west of the fleet, out of sight. There's also the fact that Culloden, which was Trowbridge's ship, was quite a distance from the main fleet, having captured a merchant vessel. Yes, the thing we're talking about is the main fleet action. If I was going to be talking about all the little actions where they're capturing random French merchant vessels and small vessels which are wandering around this area, we would be here all frigating night. Because they keep doing it. Basically, the Royal Navy is that group which goes abroad or travelling and just keep going, yoink, that'll be mine, yoink, that'll be mine, yoink, that'll be mine, yoink, like that, yoink, like that. Basically, Dr. Dan's in the chat. They're like taking Dr. Dan around a museum shop. Okay? They are like taking Dr. Dan around a museum shop. He is lovely, but he wants to have it all. They're a pack of corkies. Yeah, to be fair, poodles are just as interested in those. Verdun, I have Prof. Lambert's book on those actions pre-Nile. It's funny. It is. They're just going, oink, oink, I want this. It is funny. Trowbridge decides to abandon it. Abandon the merchant vessel. He's got a surprise crew aboard it, but abandons it and decides to rejoin Nelson. There's a big battle in the offing. There are big prizes at stake. It's just the Royal Navy drawn in. Are they drawn in by loyalty to Nelson? Are they drawn in by loyalty to the crown? No! There are big prizes that way. We spotted a French battle fleet. Examiner. Actually, the ships of this era don't all look the same. They might have similar sort of... They will have slight differences in rigging, but also they have differences in colours. Even amongst the fleet, they'll all be differently coloured and originated. Yes, the flags will help, but it's the rigging style and it's some of the other things that they can usually use to tell them are different. And again, if you and I were looking at the rigging today, we would probably take a while to figure it out. Because our lives don't depend on the rigging and we don't study it as deeply as the people who are involved at the time. But at the time, the people who were using the rigging so regularly knew it backwards, forwards, and sideways. Good boy. Good boy. Good boy. James Bond, sell your masters, I throw the small fish back. Yeah, occasionally. Now, the thing is, at this point, if Bruce had ordered the ships to set sail, he possibly could have got them out the bay and possibly could have got them moving. But he didn't. He didn't. Instead, Bruce does the typical Bruce. And he decides to have a conference on Lorient and recall his shore parties. Many were still not back by the start of the battle. And so they took men from the frigates and distributed among the ships of the line. And his plan was to use the shoals on Aboukir Island. Now, if you're looking at this map, you might be going, well, hang on, Alex, where is Aboukir Island? Well, there is. There's a little island, a tiny one, and a tiny shoal just up here. Just up here. But the thing is, and this is the real problem, it's not much of a shoal. And if you hug the coast, you can go through a channel and get round it. And if you go wide of it, you can easily get round of it. It's not really going to do much to you. And this is why I say the shoals really don't count. It's one little shoal. You're relying on the Royal Navy being bad sailors and missing it. Okay. That's toxic. That is toxic. We've been over this before. I will use the glade. Poodles. You can look all indignant as you like, but I'm not putting up with that. Good boy. Now, having a nice conference is great. It means you get to have a meeting of your officers. It doesn't really help things. And by 1600 hours, the ships are all in sight. And at this point, Bruce is trying to order them to abandon their plans to remain anchor and try to make set for sea. But that's the problem. At this point, the same guy who I keep saying is the good naval officer amongst the French at this point, Blanquet, goes, they don't have enough men on the French ships to both set sails and crew the guns, so they can't go to sea. Because of the shore parties they've sent ashore, because of all the other silly things they've done. They can't. You're looking adorable, but there's an actual thing in your way. You're trying to look adorable and cute for everyone, but yeah. You're lining up wrong. Okay, now you're pushing girls. Oh, cute. You now realise where your camera is and you've got the line out. Okay, cutie. Don't press the keyboard, please. So, Nelson, in turn, has a plan. And his plan is this. He wants to get in close, and if possible, he wants to double up on the enemy. He wants to double up on them. He doesn't want... if they're anchored, if they're going to be fixed there fighting, he wants to double up on that, so that they have ships fighting them from both sides, while they can't manoeuvre. In other words, he wants to use the fact that they're fixed in position. But at this point, he's not really sure if they're going to manoeuvre or not, because surely only an idiot would sit there waiting for them. Only an idiot would sit there waiting for them. Now, he had been discussing things with them. He had been discussing and trying to work out things with them. And with his officers. And he had many discussions with his captains beforehand. And his plan, as said, is to pass down both sides so that the British ships, when they found themselves fighting against the Orient, would have 3 ships on her, and every other French ship that was engaged would have 2 ships fighting it. Now this would leave some of the French ships unengaged, because whilst the British do have 14 ships aligned, the French have 13. And if you're going to put 3 onto Lorient, that leaves 11, which means you're going to be fighting a maximum of 6 French ships. And 7 if you count L'Orient, which means there should be 6 French ships free. Should be. But if you're passing down the line, you can engage in other ways. And they might well be beaten. Nelson actually slows his ships down. He orders his ships at 1600 hours to put rig springs on their anchor cables. Now, this attaches ropes to their anchor cables, which actually allows them to use the anchor for maneuvering. Springs allow them to keep more a stable position, but also use it for control, so they can swing their ships around to bring their broadsides to face on enemy. And if you do this before the battle, it gives you things. It makes things prepared for the battle. All this is useful. Nelson also added, because he thought it was going to be a night battle, that each ship prepare 4 horizontal lights at the head of their mizzenmast and hoist an illuminated white ensign. The reason he chose the white ensign was, unlike the red and blue ensigns, it's different enough from the French tricolor that it would not be mistaken in poor visibility. And this was all done to stop blue on blue in a night action. This is, one of the earliest pieces of night fighting instruction we find in the Royal Navy, and one of the earliest pieces of night fighting instruction we find in the world, really, that's been written down and remembered. No. No. And hello, Ibex. The fun thing is, of course, with this plan is that it could go horribly wrong. If the 6 French ships maneuver that would be unengaged, maneuver and started pulling up the fleet, and if the French actually are also rigged with spring sails, springs on their anchors, they can swivel round. If they are fully crewed and fully manned, they can deploy everything and can do what they need to do. And the French could have won this battle. There's everything to believe in Nelson's point that he would either have a peerage by the end of the day, or he would be in Westminster Abbey. He'd either die a hero or be given a lordship because of the battle he'd face. And the thing is, that's kind of something which St. Vincent was gambling on, because either way, the French fleet would get destroyed. Either way, the French fleet would get destroyed, and that's the important thing. That's the thing from a strategic level for the British. Because if you destroy the French battle fleet in Egypt, supporting Napoleon, he doesn't have a chance of getting home. He's got a load of merchant ships. They are never going to fight their way through the blockade of Toulon, and the Royal Navy can send another squadron to blockade them, and they will. Won't need to be much, you'll just need a squadron of frigates, probably. But it'll be enough. So this is the gamble. St. Vincent has sent Nelson. He's sent him captains on the Trowbridge. He's not sent him another admiral to debate with or anything like that. He has literally sent them this force because he knows this is how Nelson will play it. And it doesn't matter how many. Nelson could have been told there were 18, 20 ships that are lying there. He would still do this battle plan. Because his aim is to destroy as many of the French ships as possible. Not because he's a glory hound in this scenario. No, he's not. Because that is the way to win this war on a strategic level. You destroy the French battle fleet, the battle squadron in the fleet or battle squadron, whatever you want to call it, in the Egypt area, in the Western Mediterranean. And Napoleon and his army and his transports are captured in Egypt. Yes, they can cause trouble in Egypt. But honestly, The East India Company does most of its trade around the world anyway. It'll just have to stop doing the bit of trade which goes up the Red Sea, overland, and through the Mediterranean. They're just going to have to stop that. They're just going to have to carry on going around the Cape route, and it'll annoy them. It'll cause trouble. But that army will be cut off from logistics supply from France. It won't be getting enough musket balls. It won't be getting enough cannonballs. It won't be getting enough gunpowder. It won't be getting replacement muskets. It won't be getting uniforms. It won't be getting anything it needs to keep functioning. You are basically going to turn a massive army into a distant force of prisoners who are starving and lacking in supplies. That is the advantage of this battle if it goes right. That is the advantage of this plan if it goes right. And this leads to the battle. Frankly, Blanquet wins his argument, and Buys abandons the order to set sail. Bruce is just, yeah. He decides that now, as he expects to be attacked at night, put springs on their anchor cables and prepare for action. He tries something even more clever. This is the one thing Bruce does try, which is clever. He sends out one of his ships, one of his frigates. He sends out the Alert. Now, the Alert is a small vessel, but it's still a cable vessel. What are you growling over? Only two off. A spring is an extra cable, a rope, attached to the anchor that allows you to get more control over the anchor position and allow you to give you another point of control over it. So it allows you to maneuver the ship based on the anchor, to pull the ship round based on the anchor. Good boy, go to sleep. The thing is, Bruce sends out the Alert. The Alert goes out and it tries to get the British to follow them so that they will become grounded across the shoal, following this frigate. But of course, what has Nelson done? Nelson has set up all these different symbols, these things, the white ensign, the illuminated white ensign, the four lights in the mizzenmast, and all these things, so that the ships can identify themselves. So the Royal Navy captains are looking at that French ship and going, "You must think we're stupid, man." And the French captain's going, "I don't know why they're not following me. I'm a frigate leading the line. Surely they should be following me." And the British are going, "Look at yourself. Where is your illuminated white ensign? Where is your lights? Copy us at least. Try and make us follow you." Obviously, the French hadn't read their Drake. Otherwise, they're known to turn the lights on. Roy Walker, did the French send so many sailors ashore because Napoleon didn't understand what risking of losing his fleet, even at considerable cost to the British, would do to logistics? Not really. Honestly, Bruys had been one who'd offered the fleet ashore and helped assist them because Napoleon was his god, pretty much. And Napoleon was who he was basically supporting in every single way possible. And Raleigh has just been taken off to bed, I think. Not sure why, but he's been taken off to bed. And yeah. Knight, stop jumping ahead. Please don't in the questions. We're getting into the battle. We've got a long way from that point. Don't jump ahead. Okay? Now, the thing is, the British are following this, avoiding this ruse, and the plan is sort of being set up. But also, the French don't know what the British plan is at this point. The French don't know what the British plan is. The French are seeing them coming in and roughly in a line of battle, so they think they're coming in to fight the same old way, which is good, because if they are, this will be a repeat of the Swedes versus the Russians again, won't it? That'll be the scenario. It'll be the Swedes versus the Russians. But it wasn't to be. It wasn't to be. Now, for the English, for the British, there is an advantage here. The British didn't have any charts of the depth or shape of the bay, but they had a sketch map which Swiftsure had attained from a merchant captain that they had captured. They had a British atlas on Zealous, which was inaccurate. And they had a 35-year-old French map aboard Goliath. Now, the thing is, Hood and Foley both offer to lead into battle. Both offer to test the depth of the water by casting the lead. He also, how to put this, Nelson had managed to get from the brig HMS Mutiny, which was hanging around in the area and helping out under a Captain Thomas Hardy. Can't think where he will next turn up, but well, the commander of the brig was a Lieutenant Thomas Hardy at the time, had seized some maritime pilots from an Alexandrian vessel. So this allowed Zealous and Goliath to get a bit of a lead on the rest of the fleet. This is useful. Theseus then passes Vanguard to close up the gap. And by the time that 1800 had come along, Vanguard was now sixth in line of the ships, of the main group of 10 ships, with Culloden behind to the north and Alexander and Swiftsure still coming up as fast as they could. So realistically, the Royal Navy is down to about this point 11 ships. 11 ships. But they're still going. And they've got more coming. They've got more coming. And that's the point. The other three are not that far behind and are racing. The thing is, again, if we go back to all this list of officers, there is not a single name here who I would ever accuse of being tardy getting to battle. Not a single one will ever be accused of being tardy getting to battle. They are racing. They are piling on sails. They are straining every effort. Literally, there is a race going on between Ball, Hallowell, and Trowbridge. There is a race going on to see who can get there first. But with all this going on, the Royal Navy ships also start hoisting additional colours. They are making sure they have every flag flying, everything they can to identify themselves as they're going into a naval battle in the dark. And it's going to get very dark. At 18:20 hours, the French open fire. The British ignored them. The French, the Guerrier and the Conqueror are opening fire at long range, but they are ignoring them. Why? Because honestly, they don't really matter at this point. They don't matter. They can fire all they want at that range, but they haven't got bearing. The shot is just going too high and too far to trouble them. In fact, honestly, the British are starting to feel almost a bit guilty in this because they are starting to realise just how untrained their French opponents are. The shot is that bad. there are some, if you want to read up some really interesting thing, look up, there is a, I'm trying to remember which of the book it is, but there is a book which contains Foley's remarks. And of course, Foley is the captain of Goliath. Foley's remarks as on Guerrier's firing as he's going into port, as he's going into Aboukir Bay, I mean. And it's just, no. It's just no. It's it actually takes him a while to figure out he's being fired at. He presumes the French are trying to target another ship, and he spends a good 5-10 minutes trying to think which ship they're firing at before he realizes they are shooting at him. They are just missing so badly. Their shot is literally sailing far past him. And he's sort of going, who are you shooting at? He's looking around. He's trying to figure it out. Which ship are they aiming for? At this point, he notices that there is a gap between Guerrier and the shoals on the land. You can see in this painting, it's quite beautifully pictured. You've got these shoals, the shallow water parts, you know, where the sort of the beach and the bay really comes out before it reaches the shelf. And there's a gap between that and Guerrier. And Foley remembers the instructions that were given by Nelson. And he goes straight through it. They're missing him. He's got enough time. He's basically, in the nicest way, he's being so unengaged by the enemy, despite them firing at him, that he's got enough time to spend ages studying the shoals and going, I think I can make that gap. I'm sure I can make that gap. I'm going to maneuver a third-rate ship of the line through that gap. It's basically maneuvering a bus through a gap which is designed for a Mini Cooper. But you've got enough space to just squeeze it through. Just squeeze it through. You should not be able to do this. If you're being accurately and well engaged by your enemy, you should not be able to do this. This is another problem with Brue's plan. His fleet can't shoot. They can't shoot for a toffee. If they were maneuvering and they were able to maneuver the ships, that might help them, actually. That might help them. But they're not. They're stationary targets. They're firing against moving targets. So they've made themselves an easier target for the British, while not really helping themselves. And he actually waits to fire till he crosses the bow of Guerrier. And then he lets rip. Goliath lets rip with everything she's got. Every cannon is double-shotted. So every cannon is firing 2 balls, which normally cuts about the range they can fire down to a third, effectively. But that doesn't matter, because he's passing that close to the frigating Guerrier that he's within pistol shot of it. And he is double-shotted, so he rakes the bow of Guerrier with every single ball he can. And unsurprisingly, this basically blasts the Guerrier into pieces, because these shots hit either the bow or the unprepared port side of Guerrier, which wasn't expecting to come under a fight. They were expecting the British to be on their starboard side, so they did nothing to defend their port sides. And so, whoomp! Everything's going in. He also had aboard not just Royal Marines, but a company of Austrian Grenadiers. As you do. You know your Royal Navy. You collect things as you're wandering around. Oh, we found a company of Austrian grenadiers. Do you fancy joining the battle we're coming up for and going hunting the French? The Austrian grenadiers go, yeah, count me in. And so the Royal Marines and the Austrian Grenadiers are literally firing their muskets with absolute joy. It's practically target practice range for them. It's so short range, it's beyond belief. No one expects to be in this position. Now, Foley decides he's done so much damage to the Guerriere that instead of anchoring next to it and engaging it, he decides to pass on. And he decides to go on to the Concurrent. Now, the Concurrent is the second ship of the line, but he anchors almost to the stern of that. Almost to the stern. So he's almost between the Concurrent and the Spachet. And this is useful for him. This gives him great positioning. And he's happily engaging them. He's happily blasting away at their undefended, unexcused side. So Trazen was an RN officer once. Pretty much. I have often decided that Trazen is modelled on a 18th and 17th century Royal Navy officer. They just, you know, it helps. Yes, they do have a habit of throwing grenades. That also helps. And after this, of course, the French find other ships follow in, because the Royal Navy ships are going, hang on, what did Goliath just do? Oh, that looks cool, I'm going to give that a go. So, Hood comes round. Hood also has fun crossing the French line, and decides to anchor next to Guerriere. So, you know, this time, because Hood comes around and goes, actually, that's annoying. You've put me in a bad position. I'm anchored here. And within 5 minutes, Guerriere is pretty much knocked out of action. She's lost her foremast. She's looking like she's on fire from stem to stern. She's in a terrible position. And do you know what's worst about all of this, by the way? Guess where all the French captains are at this point? Guess where the commanders of the ships, all those admirals, are at this point? Does anyone think they're aboard their ships? Because did I mention earlier they went back to their ships? No. I said they'd been called aboard L'Orient for a meeting. They had been. They weren't home yet. They hadn't gone back to their ships, and they have already lost the Guerriere. They were still having their conference when the battle started. They were still having a meeting. At no point has anyone gone, the Royal Navy are getting awfully close. Gentlemen, get back to your frigating ships. They get into their boats. And actually, the captain of the Guerriere is ordering the men of his barge to return fire on the Zealous because they are getting bushwhacked. It's terrible. This is how not to fight a battle by the French. Nelson's pulled off a masterstroke, but he's been, in a nice way, it's kind of undercut by the French are Laurel and Hardy. Now, the third ship of the Royal Navy to join action by this point is HMS Orion under Captain James Samaras, Sir James Samaras, and he's at the head of the main line, and he notices that, well, where have those other ships gone? Okay, they've gone to they've gone to that side. What shall I do? How should I do this? Well, I have a plan. I'm going to go round there as well. I'm going to go between them and the shoreline as well. Don't you just hate when meetings run over long? Yeah, it's the classic. We're having a meeting about the other company buying all our stock. We feel it might be a hostile takeover. By the end of the meeting, you're all fired. Why? The hostile takeover's happened while you were in the meeting. At this point, the Sirius, the frigate, decides to open fire on the Orion. Now, this annoys Samaras because convention is that ships of the line didn't attack frigates in battle. They had fought other ships of the line, and frigates didn't attack them because otherwise it was an unequal fight. But as Captain Claude Jean Martin had decided to fire on him, well, that kind of makes it his fault. So, at this point, Sirius finds itself fighting Orion, a third-rate ship of the line. And Orion used just a single broadside to reduce it to a wreck. At that point, it drifts away from the shore. Now, that broadside was double-shotted at close range, but that shows why frigates do not pick fights with ships of the line. Because when a ship of the line is at close range of you, yes, your guns can cause damage, but when it double-shots its cannon and fires, you're dead in one broadside. That frigate got frigating quickly. And after that, well, he carries on fighting. He has a little detour, and during that, Theseus had also joined the battle. Theseus was pretending to be a first-rate ship of the line. She painted herself and everything to look like it, so she could wind up the French. It's fair. They have a first-rate ship of the line. We should have one as well. And Theseus felt first-rate. Ay, caramba. And so, the battle carries on. Orion pulls round and then decides to bring herself into action against the Purple Sovereign, Blanquette, and Blanquette's flagship, the Franklin. He decides he can take on two ships because Samaras feels fair. They are firing so badly. If I fight two ships, this is a fair fight, okay? All right? I am in a 74. I am a Royal Navy 74. You two are, let's be honest, the 74 and an 80. This'll be fair. It's you, me versus the two of you. It's just downright identified as a first rate. That's what Theseus felt like being for this occasion. It was self-identifying as a first rate or something. It was feeling first rate. And it's basically follows in the earlier track of what was it? Of Audacious, of Goliath actually, and just goes in and just starts bashing them. And the French are just going, where are all these ships coming from? They're not fighting properly. And there are all sorts of officers complaining how the British are being dishonourable. And that's the trouble. They are, but they're prepared to be. Then Vanguard, followed by Monitor and Defence, remain with the line of battle and anchor on the starboard side of the French. So they go on the side the French were expecting to engage. And Nelson takes on the Sparship, but there's a reason for this. He wants to double up. So Nelson has noticed his captains have already charged round the far side, so now he has to split the line and start doubling them up and start working their way down the line. And that's what they're doing. They're working their way down the line. Slowly and painfully. And it's just the French are getting doubled up at this point, and they are finding this incredibly bad for them because their ships are crewed and they have enough people aboard. They've arranged themselves to fight one side. They're now engaged on both sides. So either split your crew and try and fight both sides on one gun deck, or you fight one side and ignore the other side, in which case you're going to get pummeled and your crew are going to get killed from the other side. You're in a dilemma, and the British aren't. Now, at this point, what you really needed was decisive thinking from the French ships at the rear. They needed to hoist anchors. They needed to start coming forward. They needed to come and assist the line. They needed to try to turn it into a melee fight. They needed to do anything they could to reverse the situation from their van and their centre getting doubled up. But they don't. They don't. The main trouble the British are having is that they are missing their stations and going forward and engaging the enemy. You know, Henry Darby in the Bellerophon misses his intended position near Franklin and instead goes and fires and finds himself actually anchored firing at the Lorient. And at this point, realistically, the Bellerophon should have been for it. A 74 taking on Lorient should have been smashed to pieces solo. But she's not. She's putting up a fight and winning. This is a problem. She's also soon assisted by others, you know. Captain Westcott in the Majestic misses his station and almost collides with the Heroics. And then finds himself engaging the Tonnant and managed to become entangled with the jib boom and entangled Tonnant shroud and fighting that. But the French are just being smashed. At this point, Bruy is wounded in the face and hand by debris from the Bellerophon, and then the Culloden under Trowbridge comes into the fight. It managed to sail too close to Aboukir Island in the darkness, becomes stuck fast on the shoal, but she couldn't be moved. She gets stuck there. And she has to start fighting from that point. Now, the thing is, the battle is roughly 40 minutes old, at which point the French start to surrender. Okay? The French start to surrender. I'll answer that question next summer when we get to the questions at the end, okay? Most of the ships going in engaging at this point in their first fight, because they're going in for a close quarters fight, are going in double-balled. This is not a maneuver battle, so they're going in double-balled. But we'll talk about that in a second. The Guerrier is trying not to surrender. The crew are trying not to surrender, but they are getting absolutely smashed. They don't surrender till 2100 hours. Conquerant, well, after being given the dutiful attentions of Audacious and Goliath, which had brought down all Hamas before 1900 hours. So within 40 minutes, honestly, the French started firing at 20 past, but the British didn't start firing until half past. So it's even later than that. So basically, the French have starting to surrender after 30 minutes of fighting. Because they're just getting so heavily smashed from both sides. You're not designed to do this. You're supposed to be maneuvering. You're not supposed to be sat there getting pummeled. And that's what the French are doing. And the British are carrying on fighting because they are suffering relatively minor casualties. This is the whole point of this fight. They are inflicting horrendous casualties on the French because of how it's been arranged and how the British are adapting to the French position. But the French themselves are inflicting very light casualties on the British for the same reasons. Also, then the accuracy of their fire. They are shooting way over. They are putting too little powder in their shot, too much powder in their shot. Their guns are aimed too high. They're trying to shoot the rigging with ball shot, which is not what you do. They're doing all sorts of problems. All sorts of issues. And so, as the French ship starts to surrender, the British ships start to transfer their broadsides further down the line. And slowly, the French found themselves keep being ganged up on as the British are moving down the line. It's at approximately 8:30 that a splinter from a Lagrange shot, as it's called, from Spartiate struck Nelson in over his blinded right eye, caused a flap of skin to fall across his face and temporarily completely blinded him. But Berry managed to catch him, carry him below, and, well, the chaplain was called for, but as usual, Nelson in most battles does prove to be a bit of a hypochondriac. He isn't actually dying. It's soon realised it's a flesh wound, and Michael Jefferson, who's the ship's surgeon, stitches the skin together, and he goes back on deck shortly. Because here's the thing about Nelson. He's both one of the world's biggest hypochondriacs. The moment he's injured, I'm going to die! Tell my wife to remember me! And then he's repaired, and he's told, rest now, you've just had a head wound, and he's back on deck, leading the battle. He is... I don't know how to describe him realistically, but yes, he is that way inclined. That's it. But he's a good admiral. I'm not saying he's not a good admiral. I've always come a good admiral. He's just a bit of a hypochondriac when it comes to getting wounded. Just a tad. I swear he'd been practicing his lines for when he died all his life. Ay, caramba. Anyway. The Purple Sovereign is interesting because it's at this point being engaged by both Defence and Orion. And it's lost its four in its main masts, so it's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere at all. And their captain has managed to get back aboard, but almost as soon as he's aboard, he's wounded. And then her anchor cable is cut, and she starts drifting towards the Orient, which opens fire on her, because the French have not got the same things for avoiding engaging each other in the dark. At this point, the French also improvise a fire ship, which just drifts through the battle and misses the Orion. And no one's quite sure where it came from. They think it was launched from Guria as the battle began, but no one's quite certain. There's just this barge thing drifting through the battle that's setting light to everything. But Purple Sovereign is now out of the battle. Purple Sovereign is just now at the battle. And she basically surrenders during the night because she is wrecked. At this point, Blackett has suffered a severe head wound, and her captain has been the Captain Gillett has been carried below, unconscious. So the Franklin is basically not being commanded by anyone. And then a fire breaks out on the quarterdeck, which leads to its arms locker exploding. And yeah, so the Franklin is also, whilst they're still fighting, they're not really much of them fighting left. Bellerophon is now in serious trouble versus the Orient, because the Orient has actually started hitting its target, and that's a problem. And he manages to drift away from the battle by cutting his cables at 2020, but he is still fighting, and he's still engaging broadsides with other French ships as it goes on. But the thing is, the really disturbing thing about that fight is, yes, Bellerophon's drifting away from the fight, but it's inflicted more damage on the Orient than has been inflicted on it. And that's a problem. That is a problem. Bruce had been struck in the middle by a cannonball and cut in half. He died 15 minutes later. So he is dead. He's dead. He's gone. He died on deck, refusing to be carried below. He's literally had his middle cut in half by a cannonball. He's dead. He refuses to be carried below, so his men see him dying. It's great for their morale. Their admiral's dead. But he died on his deck. Orion's captain is wounded, struck in the face by debris and knocked unconscious, and his 12-year-old son had lost a leg to a cannonball standing by his father. Again, having your son along in a battle like this really makes sense. But HMS Majestic, well, after being entangled with Tonnant and suffering heavy casualties, has had Lieutenant Robert Cuthbert assume command, and she was drifting south and was now stationed between Tonnant and Hirut and engaging both successfully. Lieutenant Cuthbert was doing a very good job. She might have lost her captain, but this is again the whole thing of the Royal Navy has a depth of officers, which the French do not have, because of the relative stability of Britain versus the problems of France that they had. And, well, HMS Leander, remember, HMS Leander is a fourth-rate ship of the line. She tried to help the Culloden off the shoal. It had failed. So she's decided to sail down the line and start raking the Franklin and the Orion. Yes, a fourth-rate ship of the line. HMS Leander has decided that what you do in a battle is you get between a third rate and a first rate and you start pummeling them. Yes, one has 80 guns. One has 118 guns. Or 120, depending on your maths, you put them together. And you only have 50. But by gum, you will give them the best of British. By the way, there are some battles which really do make you feel mildly patriotic, as long as that mildly patriotism is you British, is people being absolutely insane. And going into a battle and going, I've got a 50-gun fourth-rate ship of the line, I will fight both a first-rate and a third-rate simultaneously, is it? Just the case of, no, you don't do this. Don't do this. You're a fourth rate. You might be still technically a ship of the line, but you're the baby ship of the line. No, you're for fighting people like the Danish and the Swedish, not for fighting the French. Don't do this. But he's going to do it. Yes, and Leander only has 24-pounders and 12-pounders, so it's just, no, you don't do this. It's just, no, but she's going to do it. And this is why Leander is such a great name for Royal Navy ships, and why I was so annoyed we don't have a Leander currently in the Royal Navy. I feel you should have a Leander in the Royal Navy. They never recognise how big their opponent is. They do not understand the concept of size. They do not understand the concept of this as we are outgunned. No, we shall engage. It's an entire name which the entire history of them is, they are the corgis of ships. Yeah. And at this point, the British are just gumming up and fighting. The Swiftsures in the battle, Alexander's in the battle, and she pulls up closer to Tonnant and starts having a nice fight with the Lorient. And that's the thing. At this point, Orion is engaged by pretty much every ship that can be sent to her. And the HMS Alexander and the Leander are slamming into her. And it's a case of, on paper, this is a fight which Orion should be absolutely smashing her opponents in. And she's not. She's not. And the Bellerophon is adding to this, and it's just, no. At this point, at 2100 hours, the British start to see a fire on the lower decks of the Orion. And the British start to fire their guns directly into the blaze. Now, why would you do this? Because you stop the French being able to do firefighting. The British have spotted the first freight's on fire, and they're not bothered about capturing it. They're fighting to destroy the French fleet, remember. That's their mission. Capture is good, but destroy is just as good, and they will destroy first and take the surrenders later. And with now Swiftsure, Alexander, Orion, Leander, all pouring fire into the fire, they see it getting worse and worse, and within minutes, it's going through the rigging and the sails are alight, and at this point, the Swiftsure, Alexander and Orion, which are all the closest ships, stop firing, close their gun ports, and start pulling away from the ship. They know it's going to go up. The British realise it's going to boom, and there's no point bothering with it. They are getting out of the way there. They start soaking their sails and decks in seawater to prevent them catching fire when it goes boom. Tonnant, Hyrieus and Mercure all try to pull away from their flagship as well, but they're pulling away into other ships which are engaging them, because the Royal Navy has other ships which are further away which are engaging them. At 2200 hours, the fire reaches the magazines. And that's when Orion goes boom. Several hundred tons of powder and shot go up. And it's one of the largest explosions which has ever been seen. The flaming wreckage goes all over the ships. It flies over the ships closest to it, and most of it actually falls on ships which are further away. The Swiftsure, the Alexander, the Franklin. It causes secondary explosions on the Franklin. The Swiftsure and Alexander are far better prepared for it. Honestly, I would say there's a huge debate about how the fire started. There's all sorts of suggestions. But my theory is that she's being engaged at such close range that it reaches the point at which a fire is started. It only needs for some of the powder to get ignited, some of the shot to get going, and you can get a flame. And if they've had people running around the ship, and one of the things which I don't think they've ever considered is the effect of the inexperienced powder monkeys, inexperienced crew handling the shot, moving it around the ship. If you have gunpowder pouring around the ship and into the spaces and it's not being properly cleaned up, that can start a flame trail. So there are lots of different potential reasons for it starting. But we're basically certain that it's at least two big explosions that wreck the ship. There's a smaller one and then there's a bigger one. Roughly 1,000 men are killed. Roughly 1,000 men are killed. There are very few survivors from her. We're talking less than 100. A first-rate ship of the line blowing up, an entire crew going. Believe it or not, there is a lull in the fighting for 10 minutes as everyone's kind of shocked at what happened. And Nelson gives orders that boats be sent to pull survivors from the water around the Orion because that's what you do. But the French restart the engagement. At 22:10 hours, the Franklin starts by firing on the Swiftsure. At which point, Blanket, who had been trying to do the fighting, starts getting blasted by Swiss-German defense. He suffers a severe head wound, and soon half of Franklin's crew have been killed or wounded because he decided to open up fire again instead of surrendering at that point. And the fighting keeps on throughout the night. The French rear had kept firing at the ships ahead, but they hadn't manoeuvred to help. They hadn't really helped anything. All they'd done is actually destroy some of their own ship's rudder. They hadn't really been assisting. They had just been sitting there blasting. At 0400 hours again, when the sun rises, they're firing on, and the Gilliam Tell, the Tonnant, the General Timlin, and are starting to fight the Alexander and the Majestic. However, Goliath, Theseus come up, as do other ships, and soon the French are being overwhelmed. Soon they're being overwhelmed. Things are so bad that the frigate, the Artemis, actually is abandoned, and they actually blow their own ship up, so the British can't take it. Eventually, the French tried to pull away. Eventually, they managed to pull out. But that's only 2 ships of the line. 2 ships of the line and 2 frigates managed to get away. The rest, they're blasted to pieces. They're gone. And for the French also, they have lost a lot of their senior officers. And the ships which do okay, they have casualties still. It's the Gilliam Tell, which, by the way, goes on to become the HMS Malta. So that tells you about what happens to her. She survives the Nile. But, yeah. She gets captured in an action on the 31st of March, 1800. So not long later, she gets captured. They managed to escape an 80 and a 74. But seriously, once you start to look through the dead, the number of French captains and admirals who die in the battle, the French lose more than just ships. The French lose more than just ships. Which brings us to the results. And this is one of the more famous paintings of the Lorient blowing up. It was described as a brilliant light, an explosion like none had ever seen before. It's very hard to set up a ship's magazine. It's very hard because they are kept low in the water, low in the hull for a reason. They are kept, as protected as they possibly can be in a fight. They have thick wood around them. They tend to be lined with material to try and protect them from sparks, etc. Everything's done to protect them. But that's been devastating. But the results of the battle, the results of it, the British have several ships which are damaged and need to be repaired. Culloden is grounded in Aboukir Bay. Hull was severely damaged, but she was pulled off. And they looked after her. They could do that. In contrast, for the French, they got smashed. They got smashed completely. And some of these ships are actually quite difficult to get back into service. We'll answer that, Seneca, after we get to the questions, but there's a whole debate about whether he survives that. The interesting thing, of course, is that the admiral who gets away from this fight is Contre-Admiral Pierre-Charles Villeneuve, and that's basically his claim to fame. His claim to fame is that he manages to get out of this battle. He managed to get the Guillaume Tell out and the Genereux out, but he does that by staying back and not actually getting in the battle, and in the morning escaping as quickly as he can when light comes up. It is an annihilation battle. That is why I say Trafalgar is a victory. Trafalgar is a victory, and it's a good one. But the French and the Spanish get away with 16 ships of the line. They have 17 captured and 1 destroyed, so they get away with 15. So they lose roughly half their combined force, right? At this battle, they lose 11 out of 13. That's a lot of their force. That is a lot of their force. If you think about it, they've lost roughly 85% of their fleet in this battle. Glad you enjoyed it, Kai. 85% of their squadron. And most of it can be put down to leadership decisions. That's the difference. That is it's leadership in this battle. This battle is entirely one of leadership. There are many options that Bruy could have done, and dozens with 84%. Yeah. You're doing roughly the same math for me. Each ship accounts for roughly 8%. And it's actually slightly less than that. Each ship counts for roughly 7.5%, I think. Roughly. Something like that. 7.7 or something. And yeah, it works out as roughly 85% of their force, something. 85% of the force. It's just, no. Uh... 17 out of their 20 starts Lions, if you want to put it that way. And it gets, even if you add in the frigates, and you go, well, they had 4 frigates there, so they actually had 15 ships there. Okay, they actually had, 17 ships there. Okay, and they got 4 of them out. Alright. Does that really improve things? Does it? Because, yeah, that means they lose 76% of their fleet. Doesn't really help things. And then you consider the frigates they get out are not, they lose both their 36 fifth-rate frigates, 36-gun fifth-rate frigates. They get their 40-gun frigates out. That's good. But then, of course, you start to consider the first-rates and you go, well, they get one of their 80s out and one of their 74s. Yes, but they lose 2 of their 380s and they lose their 120. So they lose their first rate. They lose 2 out of 3 of their 80-gun ships. And they lose all but one of their 74s. It just gets worse the more you add it up, the more you look into it, and the more you consider the losses. But the biggest result is this means that there's a Royal Navy squadron which is active in the Western Mediterranean, and the French fleet doesn't exist in the Western Mediterranean. There is nothing there left that can really fight Nelson. Nothing there that can fight Nelson. The Guillaume Tell and the Villeneuve and the Genereux are running. Those two ships are running. They are gone. They're not staying around to fight. Yes, his ships have been damaged, but in the nicest way, he's got Leander, which has somehow got through the battle with only light damage. He has got Audacious, which also got light damage, Orion, which got light damage, and Zealous, which got light damage. And Minotaur, light damage. And defense specifically refers to only her mast lightly damaged. So, to be honest, Nelson has pretty much 6 ships which are still ready to fight happily in the morning. And I would like to point out that even the ships which were theoretically severely damaged had started manoeuvring to engage the French in the morning. Vanguard, of course, but Goliath as well. So was Theseus, which identifies as a first rate, so felt that its hull being severely damaged was nothing, because it's identifying as a first rate, not a third rate. Culloden, which basically has Trowbridge aboard, fuming with indignant fury. And HMS Alexander, which had her mast severely damaged, which Captain Alexander Ball was basically going, so the masts are damaged. Can we rig new masts? If not, we row! The entire Royal Navy at this point in this squadron can be encapsulated in one word. Get me closer to the enemy. I wish to hit them with my fist. A sword is too long range. It is certainly a Jingles version of a paddling. It is a paddling. The British have time to take an accurate working out of events, and yes, they've lost 218 killed and 677 wounded. We're not sure how many of those wounded subsequently die, but we know they receive pretty good care because at this point the Royal Navy has fairly good doctors for their time, so they're certainly trying their best. They've lost 1 captain, Westcott. They've lost 5 lieutenants, 10 midshipmen, Admirals Nelson, Captain Samaras, Ball, Darby, and 6 other lieutenants are wounded, although they are all still on their decks trying to give orders, despite their doctors following around going, "Really, you should be resting, sir! Rest! Rest! Gotta go treat more wounded. Someone get that senior officer below deck!" And they're basically not helping them. The French casualties. Now, there are different accounts, and I usually give the higher one. Because their losses range from 2,000 to 5,000, depending on how you add it up. I would say the odds are closer to 5,000 due to the severe damage. And also the fact that all the records are destroyed, so they really couldn't argue about it. They couldn't get involved in that. And that's the problem. That is the problem. They really can't do an accounting. Nelson, a typical hypochondriac, would both claim he would suffer pain from the head wound for the rest of his life, which he might have done, who knows. But honestly, I'm always, with Nelson, whenever he's describing his pains and ills, there's always part of me going, yeah, darling, yeah. I know it's terrible. Yes, I'm so sorry for you. You're in so much pain. Here, have a cool compress and twaddle off. Because he is a hypochondriac, that man. He is. Every wound's gonna kill him. He actually decides, because he's got such a scar, he has to style his hair to disguise it as much as possible, you know. Which, of course, draws even more attention to the scar. So, of course, people always ask him, where did you get that scar? Is that your scar from the Nile? And he's going, yes, it pains me still. And he goes, of course, I'm such a great hero. Oh, God, the drama queen. Okay, he's a good officer, but by God is he a drama queen. I know it's already been put in the chat, but I'm going to emphasize it by agreeing with it and saying it. He is a drama queen. And basically, at this point, the Royal Navy, after the battle, their crews are going, let's just start going through the wrecks for useful supplies to make repairs and to see which ones we shall capture and turn into Royal Navy prizes. The fun thing is, the French who get ashore do not get any help, because ashore there are bonfires being lit by Bedouin tribesmen who support the British, and who, of course, intercepted the orders of sending the Admiral Bruce to Corfu. So, yes, the Bedouin are on the side. There is a reason why HMS Bedouin is a name which the Royal Navy like for their tribal class destroyers. The Bedouin were on their side. Leander, being the most lightly damaged, is sent to go to Cadiz and with messages for St. Vincent. After all, she could get there and will. Leander going, yes, please. And the specific orders are carry these order instructions with most haste. But if you happen to capture prizes on way, please get him. Yeah, I know, Edward Green. The whole meeting of Nelson and Wolseley is interesting. We'll leave that to one side. Oh, a large number of the French losses come from Lorient, but they also come from their ships. You have to understand, choosing to double shot the ships is going to cause a huge amount of damage to them. It really does. Double-shotted balls are more likely to ricochet through a hull. They're more likely to penetrate, they're going to cause more splinters, and they're more likely to cause all sorts of issues. Yes, they reduce the range down to a third, but the damage they cause is just that much greater. It's worth it. Nelson decides to have a dinner where he entertains all the wounded French officers, because you might as well. Because his eyes are damaged, he offers a toothpicks to an officer who's lost his teeth, and a snuff box to an officer whose nose has been torn off, which caused embarrassment, but let's be honest, Nelson has issues, and there is part of me which wonders if it was a bit of a joke. Franco, the Bedouins sat there on shore during a battle eating popcorn. They weren't eating popcorn, but yes, they were sharpening their knives. This is one of the problems we have with the battle, is that the French which survived, that got ashore, didn't live anyway. They kind of got killed quite often by the Bedouin. Chain shot is a good shot for taking out masts. It's not necessarily a good one for penetrating hulls and causing damage. Anna Dawson, was the double shotting done with all guns? All guns. When they double shot guns, they often double shot them all. So all of the guns were double shotted. Pop rice, perhaps. we don't have any reports from the Bedouin about the Lorient going up. We really don't. They didn't seem to have many records preserved of them. There might have been records created at the time, but they don't seem to have been preserved. The Royal Navy the Royal Navy waits to the 8th of August to decide to storm Aboukir Island, which surrenders without a fight. They remove the guns there and destroy. Well, they'd remove some guns, destroy others, and rename it Nelson's Island, which I've heard it's still referred to today by some charts, as we mentioned in the chat. You know, you might as well. But honestly, what's the biggest thing at this point is that other support starts to arrive to back up the Royal Navy. Some frigates arrive off Alexandria to assist the Royal Navy there, and you know, mutiny with Thomas Hardy aboard gets sent to Britain with dispatches. Under the command of Thomas Blair Capel, because Hardy had been promoted to captain of the Vanguard due to Vanguard's illness. This is when Nelson gets Hardy as his flag captain. He decides he's good and useful. He's tall and capable. But broadly speaking, the Royal Navy are getting in control. And it's only on the 19th of August that Nelson sails for Naples with Vanguard, Clud and Alexander, leaving Hood in command of Zealous, Goliath and Swiftsure, and the frigates, to continue their activities off Alexandria, i.e. a blockade. By the way, when Nelson leaves, that's 5 days after Bonaparte has received news of what's happened. "5 days afterwards. And that is when he states, we no longer have a fleet. Well, we must either remain in this country or quit it as great as the ancients. No. Bonaparte actually does, and I will say this, causes more trouble in the Navy by trying to put the blame on Blanquet, because, well, you might as well. He says he surrenders the Franklin too early and all those things. And that causes further trouble in the French Navy, because Blanquet had been pretty much the decent officer there. But, you know, that's Bonaparte. But let's consider the consequences for Bonaparte. At this point, he's trapped! He's in Egypt and he is trapped, and I am treating myself to another can of iron brew. I shouldn't, but I will do. 2, 4, 6, 8, yeah. Well, you know, I deserve it. Oh, tonight I deserve it. I don't feel like going and getting water. I'm going to have more iron brew. Blanquet is not to blame for this. In nicest way, if anyone's to blame, it's Bruys. But Bonaparte loved Bruys. Bruys was poor, unfortunate Bruys, who had heroically died, as useless as he was. Bonaparte, though, is stuck in Egypt. He has no supply, no way to get more supplies, no communication with France. He is cut off. He is blockaded. And the British, to blockade him, only need frigates there. They don't need anything else. They have destroyed him. And that works for it. Thank you, Jonathan Moon. Raleigh is very happy with you buying the items off Spreadshirt. Pissed off they would use the same powder charge when double shotting, but I'll answer those questions at the end. I'll do a question time at the end and answer those ones, okay? The person who actually informed Napoleon, by the way, was a staff officer sent by Jean-Baptiste Kleber, the governor of Alexandria. Thank you, Jack Ray, for the memberships. Thank you. The report comes from Admiral Gatineau, who managed to get to Villeneuve's ships at sea and sent a report, but yeah, Bonaparte has problems. At this point, Bonaparte has problems. And Bonaparte causes more problems because he orders that if any of the French Egyptians overheard discussing the battle, they would have their tongues cut out. Bonaparte had started his invasion of Egypt by, "We have come to liberate you," and then were now cutting tongues out of people who might be spreading the malicious rumour that we've lost our fleet. It's a problem for him, though. It is a massive problem for him. And what's really interesting about this campaign now and about Bonaparte is, honestly, he is, for want of a better word, marooned. Yeah, an army that was a concern in Toulon, which might have had a massive fleet with it, is now marooned and lost. And he is in Egypt. And he tries his best to stay informed of European affairs. There is an interesting discussion that there might be a certain Royal Navy officer ensuring he gets the information when he wants him to and gets the information he wants to. This, of course, is Sidney Smith, who is running intelligence in the Western Mediterranean for the British and intelligence in the Mediterranean a lot for the British. In fact, he's basically doing a lot of the intelligence operations. And when we consider that the army he took with him, he took 25,000 soldiers. 25,000 soldiers with him. To most of the battle, he took 25,000 soldiers as his field army and 15,000 more for other operations, for a total of 40,000 soldiers and 10,000 sailors. This operation will result in 15,000 killed and wounded, of which roughly a third are at the Battle of the Nile by the Royal Navy, and 23,500 captured. Less than 1,500 personnel from the expedition get back to France without being captured or killed. It's fun, really. And all this for a folly of going to there, of going to Egypt, and getting to India. With this loss of battle, this loss of supplies, there's no chance of getting to India. There's no chance of him getting to India at this point. He cannot fight his way through Syria, and even though he does end up going towards there, and fight his way through the Ottoman Empire to get to India. At this point, he can't do it. He isn't going to get the supplies. The French do a lot of Egyptology. The French do a lot of academic research and a lot of blowing stuff up, but that's what they do. But Bonaparte pretty much now is, as said, He managed to get back in August 1799. A year later. He is pretty much out of France for a year. He does manage to defeat Ottoman amphibious invasions. He's more than capable of taking on the Ottomans, but the thing is, for a year, pretty much the best French troops and the best French general is sitting in Egypt, unable to do anything. And then, well, then he leaves them with Kleber and goes off to France, leaving his army behind, which doesn't exactly earn him the love of them. Say what you will about Nelson's ego, lack of tact and temper. Napoleon's were magnificent. Oh yeah, I'm not. Please note, at no point. The thing is about Nelson is he actually earns those things. He actually does do good strategy. It's just he has an ego about it. He is. Let me put it this way: he's a drama queen. I don't. The thing about Nelson is he's not so much ego. He is a drama queen. This is what I'll get into. There is a difference. Napoleon believes his own hubris. Nelson is a drama queen. There is a difference between these two things. One is dramatically worse than the other, and it's not the drama queen. The drama queen you can manage. Think about that. This is the thing I say, the joy of academia and etc. other things is, I've worked with a lot of drama queens over the years. There is even a bit of dramatics in my personality, I have to admit. I am quite happy to admit it. Mine is usually confined to the thing of when I'm being that people say it comes out when I'm lecturing and I'm in a lecture theatre and I've got a couple of hundred, or up to 1,000 students or such in lecture theatre looking at me. Then I will do big gestures and big voices and big things, and I'll look very dramatic. Because to an extent, being a university lecturer, and especially when you've got that many students, is a dramatic performance. You are on a stage. You are entertaining a crowd. You're trying to keep them interested and engaged. So you do have to have some dramatic in you. And there are some of my colleagues who take that too far and who are dramatic in every single part of their life. There's the people who they've got a finger, they get a little paper cut and they've got to wrap up about 4 different layers of bandage, and should I go to the hospital? And you're going, you literally cut your finger on a piece of paper. But it could be infected. It was fresh out of the bag. What's it going to be infected with? But we'll leave that to one side. And the trouble is for the Ottomans is that, yes, they were fighting other people at this point, and their best troops were on the other side of their emperors, were their best commanders. But, hey-ho, he's doing well. But we did notice. Yeah, I'm not a drama queen, Stanley. Dramatic, yes. Not drama queen. There's a difference. Trust me. If you worked with some of my colleagues, you would soon know what the difference is. And I admit to being dramatic on occasion. I like occasionally the drama of it in the voice. It's fun. But the consequences for the war, well, they're worse. They are worse. Why am I saying they're worse? Because for the French, this has been a battle of annihilation. Yeah, I catch your drift, Sammy. And at Lions, I do prefer enthusiastic, but I'm unboisterous. I'm happy to admit that, but I'm happy to admit dramatic. The thing is, for the consequences for the war, for the French are morale-wise disastrous. Think about the ships they've lost. They've lost a first-rate ship of the line. They've lost one of the Oceans, and that's not good. Okay? The Oceans are some of their critical ships. First-rate ships of the line are their status ships. And yes, they planned to build 20. They completed 15. Losing one in this circumstance is really not good. And what's worse is a lot of these will not be completed for a long, long time. A lot of them will not be completed for a long time, and that is a problem. It gets worse once you start going through the fact that Orion, well, the Orion is one of the fabled, how do I put this politely? One of the fabled one of the first ships. And she's lost. She's lost, and she is one of the first ships and a critical ship in the class. You know, going from the... they've been rebuilding the fleet, and they were rebuilding around the Téméraires, the Tonnants, and the Oceans. And these ships were supposed to provide them with capability. The Dauphin the Royal is what the original name of the Orion had been. She had been renamed Sans Culotte in 1792 and renamed Orion in 1795. She'd been launched in 1791. She is 7 years old when she blows up. You think about how long a first rate often survives in the service. Think about how long HMS Victory is in service. These are major capital assets. Major capital assets. And they've lost them. That's not good. Every ship here lost here is not just those ships lost, but all those trees. Those hundreds of years of growing time. This matters. And Twaddle, you are right. They didn't lose their best naval gunners, but there again, they were actually probably their best gunners, because Lorien probably had their best ship sailors on them. Definitely had some of the best crew available. And that's a problem. She was the one which is actually fighting back mildly successfully. And she was blown apart. Yes, Victory is still technically in service, but we'll leave that to one side. Now, as a battle of annihilations go, Tsushima, Midway, and Nile are up there. They are, and there's a reason I've talked about those 3 battles in this year. Those battles are all up there. Those are the annihilation battles. There are a few others earlier which might qualify, but they're kind of interesting. What it means is that the British, after destroying this fleet especially, can start blockading the French. And they can even blockade Malta. They siege it for 2 years and they starve them into surrender. They are using their ships to cause Bonaparte trouble when he's marching into Palestine, and they stop him being able to use the sea for his logistics, so he can't carry as much stores with him. He can't support himself. They even managed to capture the siege train, which was being taken up on barges to help the siege of Acre. Yeah. They during the siege, they're actually when the French tried to storm the city, the British anchored offshore are bombarding them quite happily. It is a battle of annihilation. And it helps also persuade the Ottoman Empire, which honestly could have decided to ally with with France, to ally with the British, to go to war against the French. Because, well, the British won the Battle of the Nile. The British control. It also allowed the Austrians and the Russians to declare war on France, and that's why it's grouped into the War of the Second Coalition, because with the Battle of the Nile, with the victory it brings, then all those potential coalition partners suddenly go, you know what, we're going to join in this war. Why? You're winning, we're joining. So the Austrians, the Russians, everyone, the Ottomans, all come aboard because of the Battle of the Nile. Thank you, Bucket of Fish. That little blue fish reminds me of something. No. I'm sure that's not a fishy-inspired VTuber turned up in the chat, so we'll see. But yeah, there's a little blue fish. Anyway. Nemo. Daldo. And it's just... It is realistic to say that it's from 1799 that the British established their idea of their dominance of the Mediterranean. It's the Battle of the Nile. It's the Battle of the Nile which gives them this. It's the Battle of the Nile which gives them the strength. And, you know, there are monuments to this battle. There are monuments which are quite cool, by the way. If you don't know the story of the Cleopatra Needle in London, that was given to Britain by Muhammad Ali of Egypt in 1819 in recognition of the battle. It wasn't erected till 1878 because they didn't have a place to go. I guess that in Bucket of Fish, but you know. It's nice to have a blue fish in the chat. And nice to have a Bucket of Fish here. Thanks for following the channel. I didn't let the cannon go boom on this thing, because if the cannon went boom, it would just add too much to this channel today. But why is it called the Battle of the Nile? Because the Battle of Aboukir Bay. Because the Nile sounds cooler. Honestly, think about it from the press release, Lions, and I'm going to start the questions, so I will start up the bot, and we'll see if it works. It should work. And then I'll put the questions up. But, streamer. Not steamer, streamer. Bot found. Start that up, and streamer deck. Let's... Bot should come on. And... hang on, it's not quite connected yet. Let's see if it manages to connect. Twitch, it's having fun connecting with, and YouTube Broadcaster is not yet connected with, so it'll take a while for it to come on. I'll turn it off until it comes on, until I get a 404. Yes, we're on Twitch and YouTube. This is the joy of having Restream. It allows me to talk to both, and allows me to do naval history on both, and talk to people, which I enjoy. I do enjoy. Come on. YouTube broadcaster connected, and YouTube is working, but Twitch broadcaster is currently still having fun. It'll get there. Give it time. What I love is the CPU usage is at 1.6%, so it's not CPU usage, it's internet usage. Questions are now open, and the queue is now open, has appeared in both. All are connected. That's good. I will open up, put the questions live banner up, questions open, and I will open up Discord. So I can, so I don't lose any questions if they come in. So now you can just put the questions in, and if I don't answer them directly straight away, I'll still get to them because they'll be on there for me. Okay, the normal rules apply for the questions in that just put. And this is normally the best. That in there, and that should work. And that should work. Should work, he says. So, as the questions come in, they should appear on my system, and I should be picking them up. Thank you. I'm just going to minimize that. I'm just minimizing a whole load of things on my screen, which are causing me fun. Oh. Glad the video feed is looking good on your end, Joshua. Thank you. It's the chat which is not showing. It has decided to stop showing up for me, which is always helpful. But I have the Discord, and that's working, so I won't lose any of the questions. And the Q&A is open. And let's get the first question up. Did the Austrian Grenadiers get any prize money? Yes, they did, Tematu. They were included. They were for the purpose of the battle. They were rolled into the ship's books as being acting Marines. So they were given some prize money. Night 6 everyone. In the aftermath of Lawrence's demise, what did the French Navy ships design? The French basically keep building. They don't consider it a design fault. They consider it a battle fault. Most of the discussions which come after is how did the fire start and why did the fire start? Well, it's one of those things of we're not quite sure, but we have an idea. In that once you get fire out of control on a ship, you have trouble. And that is the problem. They had trouble. They had a lot of trouble. So it's not so much they... Okay, let's just give up that on that. And move that over to there. Get rid of that. Let's do that to there. Pull that into that. And that to that. And to that, and then I've got questions, and I've got both chats showing up. And then I can do that, and I can stick that there. For some reason, my Restream chat has decided to be really annoying and go completely wrong, so I've now got the chats as separate. But that doesn't really worry me, because I've got Discord up, and so I've not lost any questions. Oh, the chat. Yeah, it's not the video feed. It's the chat, which has been the chat. The Restream has been playing me up all evening for fun, so for funsies, and I do find it annoying sometimes. It does this, and it's just a case of, oh, please stop, please stop. How many tons of powder would a first raider carry? Hundreds of tons. It depends on how, we're not quite sure how much have been offloaded to support the army and how much things, but yeah, you're talking. It's a several thousand ton ship. And she's displaces nearly about 5,000 tons. She's carrying 120 guns in total. 32 36 pounders, 34 24 pounders, 34 12 pounders, and 18 8-pounder guns on the quarter deck and forecastle, plus 6 36-pounder carronades. She's carrying hundreds of tons of high explosive. Hundreds of tons. And it's worth noting that they've done a lot of romantic poetry about it. There's including a poem about Captain Luc Julien Joseph Casabianca's young son. The boy stood on the burning deck, whence all but he had fled. The flame had lit the battle's wreck, shone round him o'er the dead. We're not actually sure, though, if he did that. Honestly, he had lost his leg, but he might have tried to get away. He might have tried to get overboard. There is an instance that some people who were on deck were trying to get off, but there again, he could have been taken down below with his father, who was knocked out, and then there was no chance of him getting out. If Lorien had been captured, then, in nicest way, the money would have been glorious for the Royal Navy. It would have been a great thing for them, but they weren't going to capture at that point. They weren't going to capture at that point. But yeah. It's a terrible time, really, to fight. Anna Dellison, did Decre do anything related to battle, as he got a very high post later? Decres. Honestly, for the battle of the Nile, I don't think he took part in it, but he's on the frigate Diane, and he managed to escape to Malta. So he basically does nothing but sits back and follows the Gilliam Tell. That's it. And eventually he gets command of the Gilliam Tell, and he has a battle trying to break the blockade of Malta on the 30th of March, 1800. And he basically gets smashed in the battle. So he doesn't really do anything much other than get his ship away. He'd taken part in the Battle of Saints. He has some good experience, but he is really not the most successful French naval officer. He just happens to survive the Nile. He doesn't achieve much, or anything really. And yeah. I've got one for that's the last question I've got in from the chat. So, if that's all the questions that are going to come in, I will though say, I'll stay here for a couple of minutes answering questions till about half part of being live for 3.5 hours. So about another 10 minutes, so till about 20 past 11 my time. And then I will pop off and check on the rest of the family, and then I'll be on Discord later to answer any other questions you all have in the chat. And what else have we got coming out? Well, next week it's going to be Admiral Percy Walker Nels. I do know that the videos for tomorrow night are uploaded, and the video for Saturday night is uploaded to YouTube. They are going to be premieres, so people will be able to chat along, and I'll be able to answer questions. But tomorrow night, the one on propellers, I might not be in the chat for because I'm going to be live on Armchair Admirals for a bit tomorrow, and that might mean that I'm not able to be there for the live because Armchair Admirals sometimes runs a bit long. And yeah, I do enjoy Armchair Admirals because tomorrow's one I think it's on Dunkirk, Operation Dynamo, and it should be quite a cool one because it's going to have me, Drac, and Fleet in it, chatting away. The French already had carronades. In fact, Lorient had carronades aboard her during the battle. Her armament included... Where is it? Yeah, her including several 68-pounder carronades. There's not just looking at my notes. Let's see. Any other question come through? Honestly, there are many reasons why Lorient hasn't been used. You have to remember, Lorient as a name was not really already the most popular. There are issues of where Orion comes from. And she's... Yes, the dramatic loss does affect her in terms of name selection. The French had traditionally had vessels called it occasionally. They'd had ones before this. They've also been named for the Dauphin Royal, and she had several names, and she originally was the Dauphin Royal. So there are issues, but yeah, Orion. She's the last to have that name, but not the last to be planned to have that name. If I can point that one out, so that she's the last to have that name, but she's not the last to be planned to have that name. Oh, Ellsworth 18-inch guns. Oh, I'll enjoy it. Look forward to that, Mark Harkness. James C. Stanley. Q&A. Missed of brew ships. Why are subs called boats and not ships? Okay. The whole thing is, traditionally, a boat can fit on a ship, but a ship can't go on a ship can't go on a boat. That's the whole thing. And this was the idea before shiplifting gear was included. And the original submarines were so small that they counted as boats because they could be taken aboard ships. Get it? There's also the fact that they had such small crews, originally, and such junior officers in charge that it made, to an extent, to call them boats. But literally, it comes from at the point when they were deciding. The philosophy they used was boats can go on ships, but ships can't go on a boat. So therefore, yeah, we lift submarines up. We can carry them on a ship. And that was actually some of the original plans of the original submarines, was they would be carried and deployed by ships, kind of like torpedo boats. Hence, torpedo boats were called torpedo boats. And hence, they don't start being called ships until they become torpedo boat destroyers. Oh, cool, Examra. I salvaged a 1.5 ton iron 2-bladed propeller from some old wreckage. I'll talk about that tomorrow. It sits proudly on my father's at the front garden. Cool. Nice hearing. What was the planned ship to be called Orion? Oh, the French are always considering it for a battleship name. They never decide on it, but they're always considering it. It has meaning, is all I'll say. It has meaning behind it. Kind of like I would like Restream to have something behind it that worked. It keeps failing verification apparently. And that's weird to me because I'm logged into Restream in so many different systems and it's failing in verification. Oh. I also wanted to switch to an annuals thing. Oh, good lord. Okay, proof that the poodle is going through biscuits too fast. You all saw the box earlier. He's down to 2 bags. He's now down to 1.
Biscuit emergency.
There you go.
Exchange is no robbery.
That is a robbery. I have to order another 10 kilograms of doggy biscuits. He's getting through so many. He needs it though. A lot of the medications he's on for his ear infection do increase your metabolism rate, and they do mean he burns through food. So we're having to give him as much food as we can, and he's going yay. He's burning through it. What he's going to be like when he's off the meds, and we suddenly have to go, no, you can't eat everything in sight because you might get fat and podgy. He's going to be upset. Normally those things supply me about 8 months. Those ones have lasted me about 6 months. So yeah. Hayes Gray, also according to Blue Jacket's manual, ships are ocean-going, boats are not. Or something of that nature. Yeah, there's a bit of a trouble that when you're coming to Navy ships, and there was that idea was put around by people for a while, but then it was pointed out that a lot of fishing boats go into the ocean. And a lot of other things do, and it became an issue. So that definition was never really as solid as it was portrayed at some point. Basically, someone came up with that idea as being a good reasoning for it and a good logic to decide it, and then they realized there were lots of problems with it. So I keep with the naval architecture's definition, which they established on, which was boats can go on a ship, but a ship can't go on a boat. Jack Gray, if the US's Jimmy Carter can bring smaller submersibles on board internally, is it then a ship? That becomes a whole different kettle of fish. But by this point, submarines to be referred to as boats are so long that if you try and get them to change, they'll probably hurt you. It's a matter of pride now. Lance, I decided if I did what I mentioned, convert ships that post-World War II variants, it would have been even more of a massacre than... Yeah, it would have been. It would have been. This whole battle is basically a nasty experience for everyone. Oh, no, we're not getting into submarine aircraft carriers. We are not. We're not. Calvin Gazwood, a 40,000... Okay. In the nicest way. Now, please note, the only time, Carl Gasberg, that the Typhoon weighs 40,000 plus tons, or rather 48,000 tons, is when it's submerged. When it's surfaced, it's 23,200 tons. So we'll just get that over with. But yes, 280-ton Skjold is a corvette and therefore a ship. It is. But here's the thing. It's history. It's the names and the names were decided as to what they'd be a long time before we got to the Leviathans of today and the vessels of today. So, yeah. Yeah. An HMS can be His Majesty's ship and or His Majesty's submarine. Yeah, it works. It works for the navies. It works for them. Anyway, I'm going to go check on the family. I'm going to say thank you for being here. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you liked the chat, the questions. I'm going to close the questions now. So the questions are closed. And I'm going to say thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to have to put the thank yous in manually because Restream chat has broken. For being here. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see some of you on Twitch, on Discord later. And thank you for joining on both YouTube and Twitch. It's really nice to have people on it. It really is very nice to have people on both because, you know, I keep getting told by some people that there's no point in doing history broadcasts on Twitch as well as YouTube because no one will ever watch them on there. And I think it's actually quite a nice thing to do because I think both are good things to talk to people on. The Russians too call their submarines boats as well. They do. But you have to remember the Russians also call their ships men. They use male names. They describe them as male. Whereas the British, the traditional Western or British and American approaches, and most of the world, has been that a ship must be female because it carries life. So therefore it's female. The Russians call it male. So we'll not get into that whole debate, but that's the thing basically. Which is why it's very interesting when you're charting the history of the Royal Sovereign, which of course becomes English, because in British service she's referred to as female, in Russian service Soviet service she's referred to as male, and then she's returned to Britain, and of course she's female again. So that's a whole bit of fun history, which people don't tend to haven't really cottoned on too much. But historians have known it for a long time and go, yeah. All sorts of things can be taken from that. Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching, and hope you enjoyed.